My name is Clara. I am 29 years old and I am a medical billing specialist. My own father bypassed the law and sold the beautiful home I inherited without my permission. When I confronted him, he looked me right in the eye and coldly told me that I did not need a house. My younger sister stood next to him, laughing and mocked me to my face, saying she needed a luxury vacation more than I needed a roof over my head. They stole my legacy to pay for the favorite daughter's getaway, but I did not scream or cry. I just laughed. 2 weeks later, my lawyer sent them a single certified letter. It contained a simple and terrifying ultimatum: 12 hours or see me in federal court. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect lives and took back everything they stole from me, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to legally defend your own worth against the very people who were supposed to protect you. It all started on a crisp autumn afternoon when I pulled my beat-up sedan into the driveway of the suburban home my Aunt Evelyn left me. I had spent the last 2 months working overtime at the clinic, saving every extra penny from my billing shifts to afford fresh paint and minor repairs. I was so excited to start my new life, but as I shifted my car into park, my stomach completely dropped. There was a massive bright red sold sign staked right into the middle of the front lawn. Strangers were actively carrying heavy cardboard boxes and furniture through the front door. My inheritance, my only true sanctuary in this world, was being packed away by people I had never seen before in my life. I jumped out of my car, my heart hammering wildly against my ribs, and sprinted toward the porch. That is when my father, Richard, stepped out of the front door. He deliberately blocked my path with his arms crossed over his chest. He did not look apologetic or ashamed. He looked at me like I was a trespassing stranger on my own property. I demanded to know what was going on and how he could possibly sell a house that was legally placed in my name. He sneered at me, completely unbothered by my distress, and told me he was the executor of the estate and had made an executive decision. He said a single woman working a basic billing job simply did not know how to maintain a real estate asset. He claimed I would have just let the property fall into disrepair, so he liquidated it for the good of the family. I tried to push past him, desperate to stop the movers and secure my home, but he firmly held his ground, treating my panic like it was a minor annoyance. That is exactly when a brand new silver Porsche rolled up to the curb right behind my car, and I quickly realized this betrayal went much deeper than a stolen house. The drive to Aunt Evelyn's house was supposed to be the triumphant start of my new chapter. I had the windows rolled down, letting the crisp autumn air wash over me as I mentally arranged the living room furniture. Aunt Evelyn had left me the property 3 months ago. It was a beautiful, sprawling suburban home with a wraparound porch and ancient oak trees in the front yard. She knew exactly how hard I worked. She knew I spent 60 hours a week staring at medical billing codes under harsh fluorescent clinic lights just to keep my head above water while my family ignored my struggles. This house was my sanctuary. It was the only safety net I had ever known. As I turned onto the familiar tree-lined street, my heart fluttered with pure joy. I had spent every spare dollar I had saved buying fresh paint and new light fixtures. But the moment my tires hit the edge of the driveway, my foot slammed violently on the brake pedal. My breath caught in my throat and refused to leave my lungs. Right there, staked aggressively into the middle of the perfectly manicured front lawn, was a massive wooden sign with the word "Sold" painted in glaring bright red letters. My brain simply could not process what my eyes were seeing. A large white moving truck was backed up, practically touching the front steps of my porch. 2 men I had never seen before in my entire life were hauling heavy cardboard boxes and an expensive-looking velvet sofa through the open front door. My hands started to shake uncontrollably against the steering wheel. I shoved the gear shift into park and threw my car door open. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled onto the driveway. The cool autumn air suddenly felt suffocating, pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. I started running toward the porch, waving my arms and screaming for the movers to stop, to put everything down, because they were making a massive mistake and were in the wrong house. That is exactly when the front screen door swung open and my father, Richard, stepped out into the daylight. He stood on the porch with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, looking down at me from the top step. He was wearing his expensive golf clothes, perfectly pressed and completely unbothered by my panic. He did not look surprised to see me. He did not look ashamed or guilty. He looked at me with the exact same expression he used when a telemarketer called during dinner. He looked like I was a trespassing nuisance on his property. "Dad, what is going on?" I yelled, my voice cracking with desperation as I pointed a shaking finger at the moving truck. "Who are these people? Why is there a sold sign on my lawn?" My father did not flinch. He slowly walked down the 3 wooden steps and planted himself firmly on the concrete pathway, physically blocking my access to the front door. He looked me up and down, slowly taking in my worn-out sneakers and my faded clinic uniform with undisguised contempt. "Keep your voice down, Clara," he said, his tone entirely flat and utterly devoid of any paternal warmth. "You are embarrassing yourself in front of the new owners." The new owners. I repeated the words, tasting like poison in my mouth. "What new owners, Dad? This is my house. Aunt Evelyn left this house to me. The deed is in my name. I saw the will." "You stood right there in the lawyer's office and heard her leave it to me." He let out a short, dismissive sigh, acting as if he were explaining basic addition to a remarkably slow child. "It was in your name," he corrected smoothly. "Past tense. The house has been liquidated. The transaction closed on Friday. The new family is moving in today, and you need to leave right now before I have to ask them to call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." My entire world tilted violently on its axis. The blood roared in my ears so loudly I could barely hear the movers dragging another heavy wooden crate across the beautiful hardwood floors inside. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck as my mind raced to comprehend the magnitude of his betrayal. "Liquidated?" I gasped, stepping closer to him. "How could you possibly sell a house that legally belonged to me? I never signed a single piece of paper. I never agreed to this sale. You cannot just sell a house that is not yours." My father straightened his posture, towering over me to use his physical size for intimidation. His eyes were cold and calculating, entirely devoid of love. "I am the executor of your aunt's estate." "Clara," he said, his voice dripping with intense condescension, "I made an executive decision. Evelyn was a sentimental old woman who made a foolish choice in her final days. She was not thinking clearly when she decided to leave a $500,000 asset to a single woman with a basic billing job." I stared at him, completely paralyzed by the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of his words. "A basic billing job," I repeated, my voice dropping to a harsh, trembling whisper. "I work double shifts to support myself while you and Mom shower my sister with cash and pay her rent." Aunt Evelyn knew exactly what she was doing. She knew you would try to control me, and she wanted me to be safe. "You do not know the first thing about property management or maintaining a real estate asset," my father interrupted, speaking forcefully over me like I was not even a human being worthy of respect. "You would have let this beautiful place fall into total disrepair within a year. You cannot even afford to fix the dent in the bumper of your pathetic 10-year-old car. You seriously thought you could handle the property taxes and the expensive upkeep of a 4-bedroom suburban estate. Do not be ridiculous, Clara. I did what a responsible father is supposed to do. I stepped in and fixed a massive mistake before it ruined you. I liquidated the asset for the good of the family." The sheer audacity of his twisted logic struck me like a physical blow to the stomach. He genuinely believed his own narrative. He had completely convinced himself that stealing my inheritance was somehow a favor to me. He looked at me with such intense disdain, stripping away any lingering illusion that he had ever respected me as an adult or loved me as his daughter. I realized in that terrible, isolating moment that my father viewed me as completely incompetent. To him, I was just a lowly clerk who deserved nothing more than the unwanted scraps left behind by his favorite child. "Where is the money?" I demanded, my voice finally finding its rightful strength. My fists clenched so tightly at my sides that my fingernails dug deep into my palms, breaking the skin. If you illegally sold my house, where are the funds from the sale? Put them in my bank account right now. My father laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound that held absolutely no humor, just pure mockery. You do not need this kind of money, Clara, he said, shaking his head as if I had asked for a toy. You live a very simple life. You pay your cheap rent, you go to your little clinic, and you come home. A sudden influx of massive cash would only overwhelm you. You lack the financial literacy to manage real wealth. I put the funds exactly where they needed to go. They have been distributed properly to people who know how to use them. Distributed properly. I screamed, the shock finally giving way to a white-hot, raging fury that consumed my entire body. You stole from me. You committed a felony crime. I am calling the police right now, and I am having these movers thrown out into the street. I lunged forward, trying to forcefully push past his broad shoulders to get to the front door. I needed to get inside to physically stop the strangers from claiming my sanctuary. But my father anticipated my movement. He stepped directly into my path and shoved me backward hard enough that I stumbled on the concrete driveway and nearly fell. He did not care that I was his flesh and blood. In that moment, he was purely an obstacle, a ruthless guardian of his own theft protecting his crime against my justified outrage. Do not make a scene on this property, he hissed, his face turning red with sudden explosive anger. You have no legal right to be here anymore. The paperwork is finalized. It is entirely done, Clara. You lost. Go back to your sad little apartment and accept reality. I regained my balance, my chest heaving with ragged, uneven breaths. I looked at the man who had raised me, and I saw absolutely nothing recognizable in his eyes. There was no fatherly love there. There was no guilt. There was only the arrogant, absolute certainty of a man who believed he was completely untouchable. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket, my hands shaking violently as I swiped to open the keypad to dial for emergency help. I was ready to burn the entire family to the ground if I had to. I was ready to drag my own father out of that driveway in heavy steel handcuffs. But before my trembling finger could press the screen, the loud, throaty roar of a high-performance engine shattered the tense silence of the suburban street. I turned my head just as a gleaming silver Porsche turned sharply into the driveway tires, crunching loudly against the pavement. It pulled up directly behind my beat-up sedan, boxing me in completely so I could not escape. The engine cut off and the heavy doors swung open. I recognized the shiny designer sunglasses first. Then the perfectly styled blonde hair. It was my younger sister Ashley stepping out of the passenger side, looking like she had just walked off a luxury magazine cover. And stepping out of the driver's seat wearing a tailored navy suit and a smug, arrogant grin was her African-American husband, Marcus. He was a slick luxury real estate broker who always thought he was the smartest person in any room. As Marcus walked around the sleek hood of the expensive sports car, adjusting his heavy gold watch, I felt a terrifying wave of realization wash over me. The puzzle pieces suddenly violently snapped into place. My father had not pulled off this massive fraudulent sale alone. He needed a licensed broker. He needed someone inside the real estate industry to fast-track a shady transaction and push the forged paperwork through the county system without raising red flags. Ashley pulled her designer sunglasses down the bridge of her nose and looked at me standing there trembling in the driveway. She let out a soft, condescending laugh that echoed loudly in the crisp autumn air. And as Marcus stepped up beside my father, leaning casually against the sold sign, I finally understood exactly where the money from my stolen legacy had gone. The roar of the heavy engine cut sharply through the cool autumn air. A brand new silver Porsche Macan smoothly rolled up to the curb, completely blocking my beat-up sedan in the driveway. The heavy driver's side door swung open, and my brother-in-law, Marcus, stepped out. Marcus is a 28-year-old African-American man who explicitly brands himself as a high-end luxury travel curator. He was wearing an immaculate navy blue tailored suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months at the medical billing clinic. He adjusted his thick gold watch with a smug, practiced arrogance. Then the passenger door opened, and my younger sister Ashley stepped onto the pavement. Ashley is 26 years old, the undisputed golden child of our family, and a woman who has never worked a consecutive 40-hour week in her entire life. She was casually holding a limited edition designer handbag and wearing oversized sunglasses, looking like she had just stepped off a fashion runway instead of into the middle of my stolen property. Ashley looked at me standing there trembling with rage on the driveway, and she let out a soft, condescending laugh. She pushed her sunglasses up into her perfectly styled blonde hair and sighed heavily. "Oh, look who finally decided to crash the open house," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. I stared at her, completely bewildered by her casual cruelty. "Ashley," I said, my voice shaking. "Dad sold my house. He sold Aunt Evelyn's house right out from under me." Ashley just rolled her eyes and leaned against the gleaming hood of the Porsche. "It was never really your house, Clara," she replied, swatting the air as if my immense grief was just a minor annoyance to her day. Aunt Evelyn was just sick and confused at the end of her life. Dad simply stepped in and fixed her mistake. Hearing her say those exact words made my blood run absolutely cold, because Aunt Evelyn was not confused at all. She was the only person in our entire family who actually saw the truth. She knew I had sacrificed my 20s saving every penny and working brutal overtime shifts, staring at medical codes under harsh fluorescent lights, just to build a stable, independent life. She also knew that our father, Richard, demanded absolute total control over the family finances. He actively punished anyone who did not fully depend on him. I'd watched my parents fund Ashley through 3 different failed college degrees and 4 separate career changes, always keeping her reliant on their wallets. Richard hated that I paid for my own apartment and bought my own car. He despised my independence because it meant he could not manipulate me with his money. Aunt Evelyn left this specific house to me because she wanted to guarantee I had a permanent sanctuary safe from his financial abuse. She deliberately bypassed my father in her will, and he never forgave either of us for that perceived disrespect. My father stepped down from the porch and stood next to Ashley, crossing his arms in solidarity with his favorite daughter. Evelyn made an emotional and highly irrational choice, he stated coldly. "I am the patriarch of this family. It is my fundamental duty to ensure that our assets are distributed properly and logically. You do not have the means or the sophisticated portfolio to sustain suburban real estate, Clara." I looked from my father to my sister, and then my eyes landed on Marcus. He was smiling a slow, chilling smile that made my stomach completely turn over. "You really should be thanking us," Clara Marcus said, his smooth baritone voice practically purring with unearned confidence. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if giving me exclusive financial advice. "Real estate is a shark tank. Clara and you are just a minnow. A property like this comes with massive tax liabilities and heavy maintenance costs. I actually did you a massive financial favor by moving it off the market so quickly. We protected you from drowning in debt." I stared at him as the horrifying reality began to set in. "You brokered the sale?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Marcus chuckled and brushed a piece of invisible lint off his tailored lapel. "I know the right people, Clara. I have a vast network of private cash buyers who are looking for rapid investments and who do not ask annoying questions about messy titles or probate delays. We closed the entire transaction in just 4 days. It was a rapid cash transfer directly into a specialized offshore holding account that I personally manage for my high net worth clients." He said it with such immense pride, genuinely believing he was totally untouchable. Ashley walked around to the trunk of the Porsche and popped it open, revealing a stack of matching designer luggage. "We really needed this capital infusion, Clara," she said, pulling out a massive leather suitcase. "Marcus and I are leaving tomorrow for a 6-week luxury tour of the Maldives for our vow renewal content. My social media followers expect a certain standard of living. I need to book an exclusive overwater bungalow. We need private sunset yacht charters and 5-star dining experiences. You just stare at hospital codes all day in a dreary little cubicle. What do you even need a massive 4-bedroom house for anyway? Dad did what was completely fair and right. He put the money where it will actually be appreciated and utilized." I stood frozen on the concrete driveway, listening to the 2 movers laughing as they carried my aunt's vintage velvet sofa out the front door. I looked at the smug, self-satisfied faces of my family members and a profound, terrifying clarity suddenly washed over my entire brain. This was not just a case of a toxic father favoring his youngest daughter. This was not just typical family drama or a simple emotional inheritance dispute. Marcus had just openly admitted to using his luxury real estate license and his shady network of private buyers to rapidly liquidate a property he knew full well did not legally belong to his father-in-law. To successfully bypass the county clerk and push a rapid cash sale through the legal system without my physical presence or explicit consent, they would have needed a notarized signature. They would have needed a fraudulent quitclaim deed. The money from my stolen legacy did not just disappear into my father's pockets. It was actively being laundered through Marcus and his shell companies to fund a fake internet lifestyle in the Maldives. My family had meticulously coordinated a multi-layered financial crime involving felony forgery, interstate wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. They had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they were planning to board an international flight in less than 48 hours with my money completely funding their escape. The crushing heartbreak and betrayal I felt just moments ago completely evaporated in an instant. It was immediately replaced by a freezing, calculating rage. They thought I was just a weak little medical billing specialist who would cry and accept defeat. They were standing there smiling at me, completely unaware that they had just handed me the exact rope I needed to hang them with. They completely forgot that my entire career was built on tracking missing money, finding fraudulent codes, and ruthlessly auditing paperwork until the numbers balanced perfectly. I stood in that driveway for exactly 2 minutes after they peeled away. I watched the moving men carry my vintage armchair out of the front door and load it into their massive white truck. The old Clara would have collapsed right there on the cold concrete. The old Clara would have gone back to her tiny, cramped apartment, pulled the covers over her head, and cried until she could not breathe. But I did not shed a single tear. The searing heat of betrayal had completely burned away any lingering trace of sadness or victimhood. I turned around, walked straight to my faded sedan, and got behind the wheel. I put the key in the ignition and drove away from my stolen sanctuary. But I did not drive home to wallow in self-pity. I drove directly downtown to the County Public Records Building. My hands were perfectly steady on the steering wheel. My mind was moving a million miles a minute, analyzing every single word they had just thrown in my face. My father and Marcus thought they had played a brilliant game. They thought because I wore scrubs to work and managed hospital bills, I was somehow ignorant to the complex ways of the financial world. They severely underestimated exactly what it is I do for a living. I am a medical billing specialist. My entire career revolves around hunting down tiny discrepancies and exposing systemic errors. I spend 60 hours a week analyzing complex financial codes, cross-referencing dense legal insurance policies, and finding exactly where the hidden money goes. I know how to track a paper trail better than a bloodhound tracks a scent, and I knew they had to have left a massive footprint. I parked 3 blocks away from the massive gray stone building of the county clerk and walked briskly through the heavy glass double doors. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a familiar, sterile hum. It felt just like my clinic. I took a numbered paper ticket and waited patiently in the hard plastic chair, keeping my breathing slow and measured. When my number was finally called, I walked up to the thick plexiglass window and politely asked the clerk for the complete transfer history and deed records for my Aunt Evelyn's property address. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with thick glasses, asked for my identification. I slid my driver's license under the glass partition. She typed away at her keyboard for a few moments, and the heavy commercial printer behind her whirred to life. She handed me a thick stack of warm papers. I took the documents, walked over to a quiet wooden table in the corner of the room, and sat down. I spread the pages out in front of me, taking a deep breath before diving into the dense, fine print. I did not look at these papers like a grieving daughter searching for closure. I looked at them like a ruthless auditor, searching for a critical discrepancy. I immediately flipped past the standard transfer notices and zeroed in on the primary transaction logs. It took me less than 3 minutes to find the smoking gun. There, buried on page 4 of the stack, was a legally binding quitclaim deed. A quitclaim deed is a formal document used to quickly transfer real estate interest from one person to another. According to this specific piece of paper, I had willfully and voluntarily surrendered my entire legal interest in the property, transferring full ownership directly back to my father's trust. I stared at the bottom of the page, and my blood turned to absolute ice. There, sitting right on the signature line, was my name, but it was not my handwriting. The loops were entirely wrong. The slant was too sharp and aggressive. My father had brazenly forged my signature. He had sat down with a blue pen and deliberately faked his own daughter's handwriting to strip away a $500,000 asset. But a forged signature alone was not enough to bypass the strict rules of the county clerk. To record a real estate transfer of that magnitude, the signature had to be officially notarized. Someone legally appointed by the state had to swear under penalty of perjury that they had personally witnessed me sign that document. I slid my trembling finger down to the bottom right corner of the page. Stamped in crisp, dark ink was the official seal of a licensed notary public. The name inside the circular stamp read, Marcus James, my brother-in-law, the slick luxury travel curator. The man who had just stood in my driveway, mocking my hospital job while wearing a suit paid for by my inheritance. Marcus had used his professional real estate credentials to falsely notarize a forged document. He had legally verified a phantom signature to push the cash sale through his shady network of private buyers. This was no longer just a toxic family dispute over a dead aunt's house. This was felony forgery. This was coordinated escrow fraud. This was a massive criminal conspiracy committed by the two men my sister and mother trusted most in this world. I walked back to the clerk at the window and paid for certified copies of every single page. I carefully placed the heavily stamped legal documents into my leather tote bag and walked back out into the cool afternoon air. I pulled out my phone and opened my social media feed. Ashley had just posted a sparkling live update. She tagged herself at an upscale downtown steakhouse, celebrating their grand send-off dinner with Marcus and his wealthy luxury clients. They were clinking expensive champagne glasses and toasting to their impending 6-week tropical escape to the Maldives. I smiled a cold, ruthless smile. I started my car engine and drove straight toward the restaurant, ready to crash their perfect party and serve the very first course of their absolute destruction. The drive to the downtown steakhouse took exactly 22 minutes, but my mind was moving so fast it felt like mere seconds. The restaurant was one of those aggressively expensive places where the valet wears a better suit than most people and the menus do not have prices. I pulled my faded sedan right up to the valet stand, ignored the young man's confused expression, and marched straight through the heavy glass revolving doors. My medical scrubs felt entirely out of place amidst the ambient lighting, the soft jazz, and the scent of expensive truffles and roasted garlic. But I did not care. I was holding a folder full of certified county documents that proved my own family had committed felony forgery. The hostess tried to stop me asking if I had a reservation, but I walked right past her, scanning the hallway for the private dining suites. I could hear my mother's distinct, high-pitched laugh echoing from behind a set of heavy mahogany doors at the very end of the corridor. I gripped the brass handles and shoved the doors open with enough force that they banged loudly against the interior walls. The private dining room was a portrait of stolen luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over a massive oak table, scattered with empty oyster shells and half-full champagne flutes. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table holding a glass of scotch. My mother, Patricia, sat to his right, wearing a silk dress that I knew cost more than my monthly rent. My sister Ashley was holding court in the center of the room, her arm draped casually over the back of her chair, while she showed photos on her phone to a wealthy-looking older couple sitting across from her. And there was Marcus sitting perfectly relaxed in his tailored suit, pouring expensive wine for another client. For one split second, the entire room completely froze. The wealthy clients looked up in pure shock. My father lowered his glass, his jaw tight with immediate anger. I walked straight up to the center of the table, my eyes locked entirely on my mother, and slammed the certified copies of the forged quitclaim deed and the fraudulent notary stamp directly onto the polished wood. The loud smack of the heavy paper hitting the table made Ashley literally jump in her seat. I want every single one of you to explain to me exactly how I supposedly signed over a $500,000 house while I was working a 12-hour shift at the billing clinic. I demanded, my voice echoing off the expensive wallpaper. I want you to look at these people you invited to dinner and explain how Marcus magically notarized a signature I never wrote. The older couple sitting across from Ashley slowly put down their wine glasses, looking incredibly uncomfortable. A normal mother would have felt shame. A normal mother would have panicked or tried to pull me into the hallway to privately beg for forgiveness. But Patricia was not a normal mother. She was a master of manipulation, and she immediately went into action to protect her golden child's perfect image. Patricia let out a dramatic wounded gasp and pressed her hand to her chest. She looked at the wealthy clients with wide, perfectly manufactured tear-filled eyes. "I am so incredibly sorry you have to see this," she said, her voice trembling with fake sorrow. "This is my eldest daughter, Clara. We love her dearly, but she has always struggled with extreme jealousy. It breaks my heart to say this, but she is deeply unwell." I stared at her, completely repulsed by how effortlessly the lies poured out of her mouth. "Jealousy?" I asked, taking a step closer. "You think I am jealous because you stole the house? Aunt Evelyn left me to fund Ashley's 6-week vacation to the Maldives. Do not try to spin this, Mom. I have the county records right here. I have the proof of felony forgery." Patricia stood up from her chair and reached out as if to comfort me, but her eyes were entirely, completely cold. "Oh, Clara, please stop this embarrassing episode," she pleaded, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. "You know perfectly well your father handled the estate legally because you simply could not manage it. You are so overworked at your little clinic. You have been terribly confused lately. Ashley just wanted to celebrate her beautiful vow renewal with our close friends, and you could not stand to let her have one single night of happiness. You always try to ruin things for your sister because you are bitter about your own choices. It is pure jealousy, Clara, and it is tearing this family apart." The clients exchanged incredibly awkward glances, clearly wanting to be anywhere else in the world. Ashley's face immediately twisted into a mask of victimhood. She grabbed Marcus by the arm and buried her face in his shoulder, acting as though my presence was a literal physical threat to her safety. I could not believe what I was witnessing. They were actually trying to convince a room full of strangers that I was an unstable, jealous sibling, making up wild accusations. They were trying to gaslight me in real time, completely ignoring the legal documents sitting right in front of them. I opened my mouth to read the forged quitclaim deed aloud, line by line, but Marcus stood up smoothly, gracefully intercepting me before I could speak another word. He played his part perfectly. He was the calm, successful African-American luxury broker, stepping in to de-escalate a crazy family situation. He offered the clients a warm, apologetic smile and quietly asked a waiter to escort them to the private lounge for dessert while he handled a minor family emergency. Once the heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind the confused clients, the entire atmosphere in the room completely changed. The fake tears instantly vanished from Patricia's face. Ashley's victim routine dropped, and she crossed her arms, glaring at me with utter contempt. Marcus did not yell. He did not lose his temper. He simply stood up tall, buttoned the center button of his expensive suit jacket, and casually shot his cuffs, straightening the pristine white fabric at his wrists. He walked slowly around the edge of the large oak table until he was standing just inches away from me. He looked down at the certified documents on the table and let out a soft, chilling laugh. He leaned in so close I could smell the expensive cologne he wore, and he dropped his voice to a quiet, devastating whisper meant only for me to hear. "You think you are incredibly smart coming in here with your little printed papers, Clara," he whispered, his tone dripping with pure condescending arrogance. "You think finding a discrepancy at the county clerk office actually means something in the real world. Let me explain exactly how this works. By the time you found out about that house, the money was already gone. I did not just wire it to a local checking account. That money is sitting entirely offshore in an impenetrable holding account under a corporate shell name you will never, ever find. We are boarding a first-class flight to the Maldives, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it." I looked him right in the eye, refusing to back away from his intimidation. "I have the proof. Marcus," I said firmly, "the State Real Estate Commission will permanently revoke your license, and the police will lock you in a federal cell for escrow fraud." Marcus laughed again, a genuinely amused sound. "You have a piece of paper that you claim is forged," he countered softly. "My firm has lawyers on retainer who bill $1,000 an hour. We can easily tie this up in civil litigation for the next 10 years. We will claim you verbally agreed to the sale and changed your mind. We will bury you in endless discovery motions and legal fees until you are completely bankrupt." He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing into cold, dark slits. "You are a medical biller, Clara. You live paycheck to paycheck in a tiny, sad apartment. You do not have the resources, the power, or the stamina to fight us. So good luck fighting a massive corporate legal battle on a medical biller's salary. You are going to lose everything trying to prove a point nobody cares about. Now be a good girl. Turn around and walk out that door before you embarrass yourself any further." He stepped back, giving me room to leave, fully expecting me to drop my head in defeat and run away crying. My mother crossed her arms and let out a huff of validation. My sister actually smiled, picking up her champagne flute to take a victorious sip. They were waiting for me to break. They had spent my entire 29 years of life training me to accept their abuse, training me to be small and compliant and quiet. They thought I would simply calculate the massive cost of fighting them, realize I was outmatched, and surrender my legacy just to keep the peace. But they had pushed me entirely too far. I reached down to the mahogany table, picked up my folder of certified documents, and held it tightly against my chest. I did not move toward the door. I planted my worn sneakers firmly onto the expensive carpet and squared my shoulders. "I am not leaving," I said, my voice ringing out loud and absolutely crystal clear. "I do not care how many lawyers you have, Marcus. I do not care how many fake tears you cry, Mom. I am going straight to the police from this restaurant, and I am reporting the theft, the forgery, and the fraud. I will burn this entire family to the ground if it is the last thing I do on this earth." The smug smile completely vanished from Ashley's face. Marcus stopped adjusting his cuffs, his eyes flashing with sudden, genuine alarm. They had never seen me like this. They had never seen me fight back. The absolute certainty in my voice completely shattered their arrogant illusion of control. My father, Richard, who had been sitting quietly at the head of the table, nursing his scotch, finally realized that Marcus' smooth intimidation tactics had utterly failed. He realized I was actually going to walk out of that room and destroy them all. Richard slammed his heavy crystal glass down onto the table with a loud, sharp crack that echoed through the private dining room. He stood up, his face turning a dark shade of red, and marched aggressively around the table. He did not bother with fake apologies or smooth corporate threats. He grabbed my upper arm with a bruising, terrifying grip and practically dragged me toward the hallway doors, pulling me forcefully out of the dining room to corner me alone, where he could issue an ultimatum designed to completely destroy my life. My father. Richard did not just guide me out of that private dining room. He dug his thick, heavy fingers into the soft flesh of my upper arm with a bruising, terrifying force and physically dragged me backward. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind us, completely cutting off the ambient jazz music and the clinking of expensive champagne glasses. We were suddenly standing in the dimly lit carpeted hallway of the restaurant right near the restrooms. The walls were covered in a dark velvet wallpaper that seemed to physically close in on me. I tried to yank my arm away from his grip, but he held on with a vicious, desperate strength that actually made me gasp in pain. He shoved me hard against the wall, pinning me in the shadows, where none of Marcus and his wealthy real estate clients could see the absolute monster my father truly was. I stared up at the man who was supposed to protect me from the evils of the world. His face was inches from mine, and his breath smelled sharply of expensive scotch and pure malice. The polished mask of the distinguished suburban patriarch had completely melted away. There was no loving father standing in front of me anymore. There was only a ruthless thief who had just been backed into a corner and was ready to strike. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat," he hissed, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, quiet rage. "You are not going to the police. You are not going to report anything to anyone. You are going to turn around, walk out the front doors of this restaurant, and go back to your miserable little life. You will keep your mouth completely shut about Aunt Evelyn's house." I pushed hard against his chest, my own anger flaring up to match his. "You cannot stop me, Dad," I shot back, my voice trembling, but loud enough to echo in the narrow hallway. "You committed federal crimes. Marcus committed notary fraud. You stole a $500,000 house that legally belonged to me. Do you really think I'm just going to let you walk away with my legacy so Ashley can sip cocktails in a private overwater bungalow in the Maldives? I am going straight to the authorities. You are going to prison." My father did not look scared. He did not look intimidated by my threat in the slightest. Instead, a slow, calculating smile spread across his face. It was the exact same smug, chilling smile Marcus had worn inside the dining room just moments before. He finally let go of my arm and took a deliberate step back, smoothing the lapels of his expensive jacket. "Go ahead and call them Clara," he said, his tone suddenly dripping with a terrifying mock sympathy. "Call the police right now. But before you dial, let me tell you a little secret about your perfectly independent life." My heart slammed against my ribs. The absolute confidence in his voice sent a wave of pure nausea crashing through my stomach. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "Do you remember your sophomore year of college, Clara?" he asked casually, leaning his shoulder against the velvet wall. "You were so incredibly stressed about paying for your textbooks and your meal plan. You asked me for help filling out some financial aid paperwork. You signed a whole stack of documents without even reading them because you trusted your dear old dad to handle the complicated financial details." A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I remembered that day perfectly. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table, exhausted from working a double shift at a campus diner, blindly signing the highlighted lines on a stack of dense bank forms. He had explicitly told me it was just standard student loan verification paperwork. I did not just submit student loan applications that day. "Clara," my father continued, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper, "I opened a massive private line of credit in your name. You had a pristine credit score and absolutely no existing debt. The bank approved it immediately. I maxed it out over the next 3 years to float my own private investments and to keep your mother comfortable. I have been quietly paying the absolute bare minimum monthly interest on that massive debt for almost 10 years, just to keep the account active and in good standing." The hallway started to spin. My lungs felt incredibly tight, as if the oxygen had been suddenly sucked out of the room. "You took out loans in my name?" I asked, my voice cracking with profound disbelief. "You stole my identity when I was 20 years old." I utilized an available family resource, he corrected smoothly, entirely unbothered by the sheer depravity of his actions. "And right now, that massive line of credit sits at exactly $75,000. The balance is entirely in your name, Clara. The Social Security number attached to the debt is yours. The legal obligation to repay it rests entirely on your shoulders." I pressed my hands flat against the dark velvet wallpaper, trying to physically steady myself as the floor seemed to drop out from underneath me. $75,000. I barely made $50,000 a year, working 60-hour weeks at the medical billing clinic. "Here is how this is going to play out," my father said, stepping close enough that I could see the cold, triumphant gleam in his eyes. "If you make a single phone call to the police about Aunt Evelyn's house, I will instantly stop making those minimum monthly payments. I will intentionally default on the entire $75,000 loan. Do you know exactly what happens when a massive line of credit goes into deep default, Clara? Your perfect little independent life will instantly implode. Your credit score will absolutely tank overnight. Your landlord will run his annual check, see the massive default, and refuse to renew your lease. You will lose your sad little apartment." He paused, letting the terrifying reality of his threat sink deeply into my panicked brain before delivering the absolute fatal blow. "And what exactly do you do for a living, Clara?" he asked, tilting his head with a cruel, mocking grin. Oh, that is right. You are a medical billing specialist. You handle sensitive financial data and confidential patient accounts. Your entire industry requires a spotless financial background. The minute your clinic runs their routine compliance check and sees a massive defaulted debt, they will fire you on the spot. You will never pass a background check for a financial job ever again. You will be unemployed, homeless, and drowning in a debt you can never possibly repay. The heavy mahogany doors to the dining room clicked open. I turned my head and saw my mother, Patricia, stepping out into the hallway. Ashley and Marcus were right behind her. They had clearly been listening from the other side of the door. Patricia walked up to my father and linked her arm affectionately through his. She looked at me with an expression of pure victorious disdain. "You really should have just stayed quiet, Clara," my mother said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "We are your family. We always know what is best for you. Now, you see why you cannot fight us. You are completely trapped. You either keep your mouth shut and go back to your little clinic, or you lose absolutely everything." Ashley let out a loud, dramatic sigh and leaned her head against Marcus. "See, I told you she was just throwing a pathetic tantrum," Ashley mocked. "She is not going to do anything. She is too terrified of losing her precious job. Now, can we please go back inside and finish celebrating my trip? The Maldives are waiting, and I am tired of looking at her ugly scrubs." Marcus let out a low, booming laugh. It was a terrible sound full of absolute certainty that they had permanently crushed me. He looked at me and winked. "Have a safe drive home, Clara. Try not to worry too much about the rent." They all laughed. My father, my mother, my golden child sister, and the scam artist brother-in-law who had orchestrated the theft of my legacy. They stood together in the dimly lit hallway of an absurdly expensive restaurant, laughing at my complete destruction. They believed they had executed the perfect checkmate. They genuinely thought that the threat of financial ruin would force me back into my quiet, compliant corner. They thought the fear of losing my job and my apartment would paralyze me into total submission. For 29 years, they had been right. For my entire life, I had backed down whenever my father raised his voice. I had swallowed my pride whenever my mother favored Ashley. I had sacrificed my own happiness just to keep the peace in a family that viewed me as nothing more than a convenient stepping stone. The old Clara would have crumbled right there in the hallway. The old Clara would have let the hot tears fall, begged for mercy, and quietly walked out the door, entirely broken and defeated. But as I stood there listening to the cruel, echoing sound of their collective laughter, something miraculous happened deep inside my chest. The suffocating panic abruptly completely vanished. The crushing weight of the betrayal, the sheer horror of the secret $75,000 debt, the agonizing realization that my parents had never loved me. None of it hurt anymore. The profound, deep-seated empathy I had always carried for my family instantly froze over, turning into a solid block of absolute ice. I looked at the four people standing in front of me, and I felt nothing but a pure, freezing clarity. They thought they had trapped a scared little girl. They did not realize they had just entirely liberated a highly trained financial auditor. By threatening my career and my livelihood, my father had completely severed the very last invisible string of loyalty that tied me to him. He had stripped away every single ounce of guilt or hesitation I might have felt about destroying them. I had absolutely nothing left to lose, and when a woman has nothing left to lose, she becomes the most dangerous force on the planet. I did not say a single word. I did not shed a tear. I simply looked at my father with a blank expression, turned on my heel, and walked straight down the long hallway toward the exit. I pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors and stepped out into the cool evening air. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I did not drive home to cry. I pulled out my phone, opened my internet browser, and began searching for the most ruthless corporate litigation attorneys in the city. My family thought they had won the war by threatening my money, but they were about to learn that taking on an angry medical billing specialist in a paper trail fight was the most fatal mistake they could have ever made. I was going to find a legal shark, and I was going to tear their entire stolen empire apart piece by piece. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my small kitchen table, illuminated only by the harsh glow of my laptop screen, and meticulously mapped out exactly how much money I had to my name. It was not much. After paying my rent and basic utilities, I had precisely $4,200 left in my personal savings account. It was the meager emergency fund I had spent 3 years desperately scraping together, one skipped lunch and canceled subscription at a time. It was supposed to be my safety net. Now it was my war chest. At 7 in the morning, I transferred every single cent into my checking account. By 8, I was sitting in my beat-up sedan, driving toward the commercial district downtown. I had spent the entire night researching the most ruthless corporate litigation attorneys in the city, and one name consistently appeared at the top of every terrifying legal review. Veronica Sterling. She was a former federal prosecutor who now ran a private boutique firm specializing in high-stakes asset recovery and complex corporate fraud. Her online reputation described her as an absolute shark who never lost a case. That was exactly what I needed. I parked in the expensive underground garage and rode the glass elevator up to the 40th floor. The reception area was an intimidating expanse of polished marble and stark modern art. The receptionist looked at my faded scrubs and cheap tote bag with poorly concealed skepticism, but I did not back down. I informed her that I had an emergency fraud case and I was not leaving until I spoke with Ms. Sterling. To my complete surprise, Veronica Sterling agreed to a brief initial consultation. She walked into the glass-walled conference room looking immaculate in a sharp gray suit, carrying an aura of absolute unapologetic authority. She sat down at the head of the long table, steepled her fingers, and looked at me with piercing, dark eyes. "You have exactly 10 minutes to tell me why you bypassed my scheduling protocol," she said, her voice completely devoid of any unnecessary warmth. I did not waste time with tears or emotional backstory. I spoke with the precise, calculated cadence of a medical billing auditor. I laid out the exact sequence of events: the stolen house inherited from Aunt Evelyn, the rapid cash sale brokered by my brother-in-law, Marcus, the forged quitclaim deed with the fraudulent notary stamp, the planned 6-week luxury trip to the Maldives, and finally, my father's vicious blackmail regarding the hidden $75,000 line of credit he had secretly opened in my name. As I spoke, I placed the certified county documents onto the table, sliding them across the smooth surface toward her. Veronica picked up the papers, her expression entirely unreadable. She scrutinized the forged signature and then traced her manicured finger over Marcus' official notary stamp. She did not say a word for what felt like an eternity. The silence in the room was heavy and thick. Finally, she set the documents down and leaned back in her leather chair. "Your father and your brother-in-law are either remarkably arrogant or incredibly stupid," she stated calmly. "Probably both. This is not just a messy family dispute, Clara. This is a highly coordinated financial crime." Right at that exact moment, my cell phone began to vibrate violently against the polished conference table. The screen illuminated, flashing the name, Richard, across the glass. It was my father. My heart immediately slammed against my ribs. I reached out to instantly decline the call, but Veronica's hand shot across the table, stopping me. "Wait," she commanded softly, her eyes suddenly sharp and focused. "Do not decline it. Answer it, put it on speakerphone, and place it right here in the center of the table. Let him do exactly what arrogant men always do. Let him talk." I stared at her, momentarily frozen with anxiety. "Washington is a one-party consent state." Clara Veronica explained, her voice perfectly steady and reassuring. "That means you are legally permitted to record any conversation you are actively participating in without notifying the other party. Answer the phone." I took a deep breath, my hand trembling slightly as I swiped the green icon and pressed the speaker button. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low and intentionally hesitant, playing the role of the terrified, obedient daughter he fully expected me to be. The loud ambient noise of a busy airport terminal immediately flooded the quiet conference room. I could hear the distinct sound of a boarding announcement echoing in the background. "Clara," my father said, his voice completely dripping with smug, triumphant satisfaction. "I just wanted to call and check on my favorite independent woman." Are you enjoying your shift at the little billing clinic today? Did you manage to pay your rent on time this month? I looked across the table at Veronica. She was silently typing away on a sleek silver voice recording device she had smoothly pulled from her jacket pocket, the small red light blinking steadily. I am at work, Dad, I replied, trying to inject just enough fear into my tone to keep him talking. What do you want? I just wanted to make sure we had a crystal clear understanding regarding our conversation at the restaurant last night. He sneered, the sheer cruelty of his words vibrating through the phone speaker. You are going to keep your mouth completely shut about Evelyn's house. You are going to forget you ever saw those county records, and you are going to let Marcus and Ashley enjoy their vacation. Because if you even think about calling the police or hiring a cheap lawyer, I will completely stop making the payments on that massive line of credit. I will default on the entire $75,000 tomorrow morning. Your credit score will plummet, your landlord will evict you, and your precious clinic will fire you before the week is over. You will have absolutely nothing, Clara. My hands tightened into tight fists under the table, but I forced myself to ask the exact question Veronica had silently mouthed to me. You really forged my signature on a legal deed just to pay for Ashley's vacation? I asked, my voice deliberately trembling. You and Marcus actually faked a notary stamp to steal my inheritance. My father let out at a harsh, dismissive laugh, entirely, completely unaware that his every word was being digitally preserved in high-definition audio. It was not stealing, Clara. It was simple resource reallocation, he declared proudly. Evelyn was a foolish old woman who made a terrible mistake giving you that property. You do not understand how to manage real assets. Marcus simply utilized his professional real estate network to expedite the necessary paperwork and correct the error. A forged signature is just a minor administrative detail when you are protecting the family legacy. The money is already offshore, Clara. It is completely gone. You cannot touch us. Now go back to coding hospital bills and stay exactly where you belong. The line clicked dead. The sudden silence in the conference room was incredibly loud. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, my chest heaving as the sheer reality of his unapologetic confession washed over me. I slowly looked up at Veronica, expecting her to look shocked or concerned. Instead, she was smiling. It was a cold, brilliant, terrifying smile that sent a shiver straight down my spine. She calmly reached over and stopped the recording, saving the audio file with a decisive click. Well, Clara Veronica said, her voice ringing with absolute pure authority, your father is correct about one thing. You certainly cannot afford to fight this battle on a medical biller's salary. However, she paused, leaning forward and resting her arms on the table. You will not pay me a single dime up front. I am taking this case entirely on contingency because your arrogant father and your foolish brother-in-law just handed me a slam dunk prosecution on a silver platter. She picked up the forged quitclaim deed and tapped it against the table. They think this is just about a stolen house. They are completely wrong. By falsifying a legal signature and utilizing a fraudulent notary stamp to rapidly transfer $500,000, they committed felony forgery. By intentionally routing those stolen funds through an offshore holding account to hide the assets, they committed federal wire fraud. And by leveraging a secret massive line of credit to actively blackmail you, they committed severe identity theft and criminal extortion. I felt the heavy crushing weight of the last 24 hours slowly begin to lift off my shoulders. I was not crazy. I was not just a bitter, jealous sister throwing a tantrum. I was the victim of a highly coordinated, massive financial conspiracy, and I finally had the most powerful legal advocate in the city sitting right in front of me, ready to tear them apart. Veronica stood up from the table, her energy suddenly vibrating with intense, aggressive focus. She pressed a button on the sleek intercom sitting on her desk. Sarah, get my forensic accounting team in here immediately, she commanded crisply. I need a comprehensive emergency audit launched on a luxury real estate broker named Marcus James. I want every single transaction, every shell company, every offshore account, and every tax filing scrutinized under a microscope. Pull his licensing records and flag his escrow accounts. I want to know exactly where he moves his money and exactly who he owes. She turned back to me, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that took my breath away. "We are not just going to stop them from enjoying their little vacation, Clara," she said smoothly, sliding a thick stack of representation contracts across the table toward me. "We are going to absolutely dismantle their entire stolen empire. We are going to expose every single lie they have ever told, and we are going to leave them with absolutely nothing. Now sign these papers so I can formally go to war for you." I sat in the sleek leather chair of Veronica's pristine conference room for exactly 48 hours, while her forensic accounting team tore through Marcus and his luxury real estate empire. I did not go back to my apartment. I slept on the velvet sofa in her waiting area, drinking bitter black coffee and reviewing the initial financial disclosures her paralegals managed to subpoena. I am a medical billing specialist. I am intimately familiar with the tedious, exhaustive process of tracking every single dollar through a maze of intentionally confusing codes. But what Veronica's team uncovered over those 2 days was a financial labyrinth so incredibly arrogant and sloppy that it completely took my breath away. On Thursday morning, Veronica walked into the room and dropped a massive 3-inch thick binder onto the glass table. She did not look triumphant. She looked like a predator who had just cornered her absolute favorite prey. "Marcus is not a luxury travel curator or a high-end real estate broker," she said, her voice deadly calm and razor sharp. "He is a textbook con artist, and he is currently drowning in a spectacular amount of catastrophic debt." I opened the heavy binder. The very first page was a comprehensive background check and asset summary. Marcus branded himself on social media as a wildly successful entrepreneur, dripping in designer suits and constantly posing in front of leased sports cars. He posted daily videos from private jets and exclusive beach resorts, always lecturing his followers about generational wealth and luxury investments. But the spreadsheets told the absolute truth. Marcus was entirely broke. His so-called luxury real estate brokerage was nothing more than an elaborate shell game. He had been actively running a classic Ponzi scheme for the last 3 years. He would convince wealthy clients to park their cash in his exclusive offshore escrow accounts, promising them massive returns on high-end international property flips. But there were no properties. Marcus was simply taking new investor money to pay off the older, furious investors, all while aggressively siphoning off huge cuts to fund the lavish, fake lifestyle that kept my sister Ashley completely mesmerized. I flipped to the next section, my hands trembling with a mixture of absolute horror and vindication. "The house Dad sold," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Where did the money actually go?" Veronica pointed to a heavily highlighted bank statement from just 5 days ago. The exact day my Aunt Evelyn's beautiful suburban home was fraudulently sold. "It never went to an offshore vacation account," Veronica explained, tapping the paper with her manicured fingernail. 2 weeks ago, one of Marcus' largest private investors finally caught on to the scam. They threatened to go directly to the federal authorities if Marcus did not return their initial $500,000 investment immediately. Marcus panicked. He was completely out of cash and facing decades in federal prison for wire fraud, so he went to the one man arrogant and desperate enough to help him: your father. The pieces snapped together with sickening clarity. My father, Richard, had always worshipped wealth and status. He desperately craved the illusion of being a powerful patriarch with a highly successful African-American son-in-law who seemingly ran the luxury real estate market. When Marcus confessed that his entire empire was collapsing, my father did not report him. He chose to protect his golden daughter's fake luxury lifestyle by sacrificing my future. Richard and Marcus colluded to forge my signature on the quitclaim deed, using Marcus' fraudulent notary stamp to bypass the county clerk. They rapidly liquidated my inherited sanctuary to a shady cash buyer and funneled every single penny directly to Marcus' angry investor to keep the police away. They literally stole my legacy to pay off a criminal debt. My stomach violently churned as I stared at the irrefutable evidence. "But what about the massive line of credit my father took out in my name?" I asked, looking up at Veronica. "He said he used it to keep my mother comfortable." Veronica flipped to a thick section of credit reports near the back of the binder. "He lied about that too," she said smoothly. "Your father has a severe gambling addiction. He has been systematically draining that secret $75,000 line of credit for years to cover his massive losses at underground sports betting rings. He intentionally kept the debt solely in your name to protect his own credit score. When he dragged you into that restaurant hallway and threatened to completely destroy your financial future, he was not just blackmailing you to cover up the house theft. He was desperately protecting his own massive fraud. I felt a cold, blinding rage radiate through my entire body. My parents and my sister had looked me right in the eye and mercilessly mocked my modest medical billing job. They had called me pathetic and jealous. They had told a room full of wealthy strangers that I was deeply unwell. And the entire time they were hiding behind a mountain of stolen money and federal crimes. They were nothing but pathetic, desperate criminals wearing stolen designer clothes. But there was still one missing piece to this horrifying puzzle. What about the 6-week trip to the Maldives? I asked, my voice hardening into solid steel. Ashley dragged her brand new luggage out of the trunk of that Porsche and bragged about her exclusive overwater bungalow. She said they were leaving in 2 days for a vow renewal content trip. Veronica leaned forward and steepled her fingers, a dark, knowing gleam in her eyes. That is the most pathetic part of their entire scheme, Clara, she said softly. There is no vow renewal. There is no 6-week luxury vacation. She slid a printed flight itinerary across the glass table. It was booked under Marcus and Ashley's names. It was not a round-trip ticket. It was a one-way flight to a country that completely lacks a formal extradition treaty with the United States. The Maldives trip is a smokescreen. Veronica continued, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Marcus knows his Ponzi scheme is completely collapsing. Paying off that one investor with your stolen house money merely bought him a tiny window of time. The rest of his clients are starting to demand their returns, and the authorities will inevitably catch on. In exactly 48 hours, Marcus and Ashley are planning to board that international flight and permanently flee the country. They are running away from the imploding fraud, leaving you completely saddled with a stolen house, a forged deed, and $75,000 in fraudulent debt. Your parents were entirely complicit. They helped fund their golden daughter's escape while intentionally leaving you behind to take the absolute ruinous fall. I stared at the one-way flight itinerary, and every single trace of daughterly obligation I had ever felt completely evaporated. For 29 years, I had played the role of the quiet, obedient spare child. I had swallowed their insults, accepted their bare minimum affection, and continuously worked myself to the bone, trying to earn a single scrap of their respect. They had taken my silence for weakness. They had mistaken my blue-collar diligence for sheer stupidity. They genuinely believed I would just sit in my tiny apartment and let them completely destroy my life so they could comfortably escape the consequences of their own actions. They were absolutely wrong. I looked up at Veronica, my jaw tight and my heart beating with a steady, ruthless rhythm. They think they are boarding a plane in 48 hours, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I want to make absolutely sure they never even make it through the airport security line. I want to completely dismantle everything they think they have. I want them to feel the exact same sheer terror I felt when I saw that sold sign on my front lawn. Veronica smiled, a truly terrifying expression that promised absolute corporate destruction. I was hoping you would say that, Clara, she replied smoothly, because we have exactly 48 hours to execute the most aggressive asset freeze and federal injunction this city has ever seen. But to completely lock them in, we cannot just rely on the forensic audit. We need an undeniable, voluntary written confession of their criminal intent to flee. We need to trick them into admitting exactly what they are doing on the record before they ever reach that boarding gate. I slowly leaned back in the leather chair, my mind instantly shifting into high gear. My family was incredibly arrogant. Ashley could never resist an opportunity to gloat and mock my circumstances. My father loved nothing more than to assert his ultimate dominance over my life. They were so utterly confident in their superiority that they would easily volunteer their own criminal confessions if I just fed their massive egos. I know exactly how to get it, I said, pulling my cell phone out of my pocket. They think I am terrified of losing my medical billing job. They think the threat of ruining my credit score has me completely paralyzed. If I play the role of the broken, defeated sister, apologizing and begging for mercy, they will absolutely not be able to resist bragging about their brilliant escape. Veronica nodded approvingly, opening her laptop and preparing to document every single incoming message. We need them to explicitly reference the money, the stolen property, and the finality of their trip, she instructed sharply. Set the digital trap, Clara. Give them exactly enough rope to completely hang themselves. I unlocked my phone and opened my text message thread with Ashley. My fingers hovered over the digital keyboard, perfectly steady and ready to strike. The tears, the heartbreak, the shock, it was all entirely gone. I was about to trap my family in a cage of their own arrogant words, and I was going to deeply enjoy every single second of their spectacular downfall. I knew my sister better than anyone else in the world. I knew that beneath all her expensive designer clothes and perfectly curated social media posts, she was deeply insecure and completely addicted to the feeling of winning. She needed to feel like she had utterly defeated me to truly enjoy her stolen wealth. I drafted the message carefully, choosing words that would stroke her massive ego and validate her twisted sense of entitlement. I told her I was so incredibly sorry for causing a scene at the restaurant and begged her to tell Dad not to default on the loans because my clinic was running background checks next week. I typed out the fake apology, feeling a dark, thrilling anticipation building in my chest. I pressed send and set the phone down on the glass table. Now all we had to do was wait for the golden child to completely incriminate herself. I sat perfectly still in the oversized leather chair in Veronica's conference room, clutching my cell phone in my sweaty palms. The sterile fluorescent lights overhead mirrored the harsh reality of the moment. I had spent my entire life being the submissive, quiet daughter. I was the reliable medical billing specialist who never made a fuss, who always backed down when my father raised his voice or when my sister demanded the spotlight. Now I had to weaponize that exact pathetic persona. I had to become the terrified, broken woman they all expected me to be. Veronica sat across from me, her hands folded neatly over her legal pad, her dark eyes fixed on me with intense calculation. She gave me a single sharp nod. It was time to set the trap. I unlocked my phone screen and opened my text message thread with Ashley. My fingers hovered over the digital keyboard. I needed to craft a message so utterly saturated with defeat and desperation that my sister would not even hesitate to take the bait. I knew Ashley better than anyone. I knew her towering narcissism and her desperate need to assert absolute dominance. If I showed even a hint of defiance, she might close off. But if I groveled, if I practically crawled to her through the digital screen, she would absolutely revel in her victory. She would not be able to resist the urge to gloat and rub my face in the dirt. I took a deep breath and began to type. Ashley, please. I wrote my thumbs deliberately, tapping out a rhythm of complete surrender. I am so sorry for causing a scene at the restaurant tonight. I was just shocked and scared. Please tell Dad not to default on that loan. My clinic is running employee background checks next week for our new security clearance. If they see a massive defaulted debt on my credit report, I will lose my job instantly. I will lose my apartment. I have absolutely nothing else. You won. You and Marcus won. Just please let me keep my job, and I swear I will never bring up Aunt Evelyn's house ever again. Have a safe trip to the Maldives. I stared at the words on the glowing screen. Reading them made my stomach physically churn, because they were the exact words a broken, terrified victim would say. They were the exact words my toxic family had conditioned me to say for 29 years. I felt a brief, sickening wave of humiliation wash over me, but I pushed it down, shoving it deep into the freezing block of ice that had replaced my empathy. I was not begging them. I was handing them the shovel they would use to dig their own graves. I pressed the send button. The tiny message bubble flew across the screen. Now the digital trap was armed and the waiting began. The silence in the conference room was incredibly heavy. The only sound was the soft ticking of the expensive silver clock on Veronica's mahogany wall. 1 minute passed, then 2. I placed the phone flat on the glass table between us. I watched the screen, completely mesmerized by the empty space below my sent message. What if she does not reply? I whispered, the anxiety threatening to crack my calm facade. What if Marcus told her to keep her mouth shut and ignore me? Veronica did not even blink. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "She will reply," Veronica stated with the absolute certainty of a predator who knows exactly how its prey behaves. People who orchestrate massive financial frauds are arrogant, Clara. But golden children who have never faced a single consequence in their entire lives are something entirely different. They are deeply, fundamentally insecure. They require constant external validation. Your sister needs to possess the final word. She needs to physically read her own victory. Just wait. Veronica was absolutely right. Less than 30 seconds later, the screen of my phone illuminated. 3 small gray dots appeared at the bottom of the text thread, indicating that Ashley was typing. The dots danced on the screen for a moment, then vanished. Then they appeared again. She was crafting her response carefully, making sure it was as devastating as possible. My heart hammered against my ribs with a fierce, violent rhythm. I leaned forward. My eyes locked onto the glowing glass. The 3 dots disappeared one final time, and a massive block of text suddenly populated the screen. I let out a sharp breath and picked up the phone. I read the first line, and a cold, dark thrill completely saturated my veins. Ashley had taken the bait hook, line, and sinker. "I am so glad you finally know your place, Clara," the message read, starting off with her signature brand of toxic condescension. "You always have to make everything so dramatic. Dad was right to put you in check. You really thought you could walk into our private dinner and threaten us. You are a medical biller, Clara. You are a nobody. You have always been a nobody." I skimmed past the personal insults, my eyes scanning the text for the crucial admissions we desperately needed. And there they were, laid out in incredibly arrogant detail. Aunt Evelyn was absolutely insane to try and give you that house. Ashley had typed her thumbs, sealing her own fate with every word. We all knew it. Marcus just did what he had to do to protect our family assets. You should be thanking him instead of whining. His business was going through a temporary cash flow issue, and those rich investors were threatening to call the authorities over a simple misunderstanding. Dad stepped up like a real man and used your little house to fix Marcus accounts. It was a brilliant move. Marcus stamped that piece of paper, and we walked away with $500,000 in clean cash. I felt my jaw literally drop. She had actually put it in writing. She explicitly confessed to the fraudulent notary stamp. She explicitly admitted that the house money was used to pay off Marcus' angry investors to cover up his collapsing Ponzi scheme. She had just confessed to a massive coordinated federal crime via text message. But the message was not over. Ashley simply could not stop herself from delivering the final crushing blow. "And do not bother waiting around for us to come back and apologize." She continued her digital gloating, reaching an entirely new level of delusion. "This Maldives trip is not just a vacation, Clara. Marcus and I are leaving the country for good. We have private offshore accounts set up and waiting for us. We are starting a beautiful new life, where we do not have to deal with pathetic, jealous people like you or annoying federal regulators asking questions about Marcus' old business. So thanks for funding our permanent escape, broke sis. Keep staring at those hospital codes while I drink champagne on a private beach." I sat completely frozen, reading the final terrifying lines of her message over and over again. She had just handed me a full-signed written confession to felony wire fraud, international flight from justice, and criminal conspiracy. I did not waste a single second. My fingers moved with rapid, mechanical precision. I took a digital screenshot of the first section of the message. Then I scrolled down and took another screenshot. I captured every single word, every insult, every horrific admission of guilt. I immediately backed up the images to my secure cloud drive and then handed the phone across the glass table to Veronica. "Read it," I said, my voice completely stripped of any lingering sisterly affection. It was the voice of a cold, calculating auditor who had just found the ultimate fatal error. Read exactly what she just sent me. Veronica picked up the phone and adjusted her posture. Her dark eyes rapidly scanned the glowing screen, taking in the massive block of text. For a moment, the hardened shark lawyer actually looked surprised. Her eyebrows raised slightly as she absorbed the sheer astronomical magnitude of Ashley's stupidity. Then a slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across Veronica's face. It was the smile of a woman who had just won a war without ever having to step foot inside a courtroom. "This is not just evidence," Clara Veronica said, her voice vibrating with pure legal adrenaline. "This is an absolute masterpiece. Your sister did not just admit to the forgery. She explicitly outlined the entire financial motive. She admitted that your father colluded to steal the house specifically to cover up Marcus' failing fraudulent business. She admitted to the offshore money laundering. And most importantly, she explicitly confessed in plain written English that their upcoming flight to the Maldives is a permanent flight from federal justice." Veronica placed the phone down onto the glass table and looked at me. The air in the conference room felt electric. "We have them, Clara," she stated firmly. "We have them completely pinned to the wall. This written confession provides the exact probable cause we need to bypass standard civil procedures. With this documentation, I can wake up a federal judge in the middle of the night and secure an immediate emergency injunction. We can freeze every single domestic asset tied to Marcus James and your father before the sun even comes up." I looked at the digital clock on the corner of Veronica's desk. The bright red numbers glared back at me. It was nearly 3 in the morning. Ashley's international flight was scheduled to depart the next evening. They thought they had plenty of time. They thought they had left me completely destroyed and paralyzed by fear. They were probably sleeping soundly in their expensive suburban beds, dreaming of white sand beaches and offshore bank accounts, completely unaware that the snare had just snapped tightly around their ankles. The meticulous digital trap had worked flawlessly. My complete surrender had fed my sister's insatiable ego, causing her to vomit out the exact legal evidence we needed to completely obliterate their lives. The fear that had gripped my chest for the last 24 hours was entirely gone, replaced by a soaring, terrifying sense of absolute power. My family had made a fatal miscalculation. They had severely underestimated the quiet daughter. They had underestimated the medical biller. Veronica stood up from the heavy leather chair and began rapidly gathering the printed county records and the fresh digital screenshots. Her movements were sharp and predatory. "The clock is officially ticking, Clara," she said, her voice commanding and brisk. "We have less than 40 hours before your sister and her fraudulent husband attempt to walk through that international boarding gate. I am contacting the federal authorities immediately. We are going to ground that flight. We are going to seize those funds. We are going to make sure your father faces the exact financial ruin he so happily threatened you with." I slowly stood up from the table, feeling the cold, smooth glass beneath my fingertips one last time. I was ready. I was ready to watch the empire they built on my back completely burn to ash. "Let us go catch them," I said. "Let the countdown begin." The clock was officially ticking. We had exactly 24 hours before Ashley and Marcus were scheduled to board their one-way international flight to the Maldives. Veronica and I sat in her pristine corner office, staring at the digital countdown she had pulled up on her monitor. I had not slept in 2 days, but my blood was humming with pure adrenaline. Veronica had spent the entire night finalizing the most devastating legal packet I had ever seen. It was a 50-page dossier containing every single forged document, every offshore bank routing number, the fraudulent notary stamps, and the explicit text message confession Ashley had so arrogantly sent me. It was a masterpiece of corporate destruction. But Veronica did not just want to file it quietly with the courts. She wanted a public execution. My mother, Patricia, hosted a lavish luncheon at her exclusive suburban country club every single Thursday afternoon. She would gather her wealthy socialite friends to drink expensive mimosas, gossip about the neighbors, and endlessly brag about her perfect, successful family. Today was the official farewell luncheon for Ashley and Marcus before their big luxury escape. Veronica knew exactly where they would be, and she hired the most relentless private process server in the city to make sure the delivery was spectacular. I sat next to Veronica, listening to the live audio feed from the process server's concealed body microphone. The sound of clinking crystal glasses and soft piano music echoed through the computer speakers. I could perfectly imagine my mother sitting at the head of a long white table, wearing her favorite pastel silk dress, holding court like a suburban queen. I could hear Ashley's high-pitched laugh, showing off her new designer luggage to the table of impressed women. Marcus and my father Richard were likely standing nearby, sipping expensive scotch and soaking in the unearned admiration, entirely oblivious to the massive storm cloud gathering right above their heads. The process server approached their table, his heavy boots clicking sharply against the stone patio. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient chatter and polite laughter. "I am looking for Richard, Patricia, Ashley, and Marcus." The conversation around the table immediately died down. My mother let out a small, annoyed sigh. "I am Patricia," she stated, using her most condescending country club tone. "What is this regarding? Are you with the catering staff? Because we specifically asked for no interruptions during the toast." The process server did not apologize. He reached into his leather messenger bag and pulled out 4 incredibly thick, heavy manila envelopes. He dropped them directly onto the center of the pristine white tablecloth, right next to my mother's expensive floral centerpiece. "You have all been officially served," he announced loudly, his voice echoing across the entire patio for every single wealthy socialite to hear. "What is the meaning of this?" my father demanded, stepping forward and trying to assert his usual dominant authority. He snatched the thickest envelope off the table and violently ripped it open. Marcus stepped up beside him, his smooth, arrogant demeanor slightly faltering as he saw the bold red legal letterhead of Veronica's elite litigation firm. Ashley let out a confused little gasp and picked up her own envelope, tearing it open with perfectly manicured fingernails. I leaned forward in my chair, my heart pounding against my ribs as I listened to the rustling of paper. I knew exactly what they were reading. The cover letter Veronica had drafted was absolutely merciless. It did not ask for a friendly negotiation. It was a brilliant, terrifying ultimatum. It clearly stated that we possessed irrefutable documented evidence of felony forgery, interstate wire fraud, identity theft, and criminal extortion. It outlined exactly how Marcus had illegally notarized the quitclaim deed, and exactly how my father had stolen my house to pay off Marcus' collapsing Ponzi scheme. It detailed the $75,000 secret line of credit and Ashley's written confession of their intent to flee the country. But the absolute best part of the letter was the final bolded paragraph. "Return $450,000 to Clara Trust account within 12 hours," the letter demanded. "If the funds are not fully transferred and cleared by 8 o'clock tonight, this complete 50-page dossier of evidence will be simultaneously handed over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Internal Revenue Service, and the State Real Estate Fraud Division. We have already secured an emergency federal injunction to freeze your passports. Do not attempt to board your flight. You are completely cornered. You will pay the money back today, or you will all go to federal prison tomorrow." Over the audio feed, I heard the exact moment the realization hit them. It was a beautiful, breathtaking silence. The confident, arrogant chatter of the country club patio had completely vanished. I heard my mother let out a strangled, horrifying gasp as the blood literally drained from her face. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. "Richard, what is this? What did you do?" "I did not do anything," my father stammered, his usual booming voice suddenly shrinking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "This is impossible. Clara does not have the money for a lawyer like this. She is just a medical biller. She is bluffing." But Marcus knew better. He was reading through the forensic audit pages, staring at the highlighted bank routing numbers that exposed his entire fraudulent empire. He realized that every single offshore account he thought was perfectly hidden had been completely exposed. His breathing became heavy and ragged over the microphone. "She has everything," he muttered, his smooth baritone voice completely shattering into a chaotic panic. "She has the escrow logs. She has the fake stamp records. She even has the text messages Ashley sent her last night." "Ashley, you idiot! Why did you text her everything in writing?" "Do not yell at me," Ashley screamed back, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch, completely destroying her perfect high society image in front of all her mother's wealthy friends. "You told me the money was untraceable, Marcus. You told me we were safe. We are supposed to leave for the Maldives tomorrow. I already packed my bags. I am not going to jail because you are a terrible broker." The entire table descended into absolute terrifying chaos. My mother began hyperventilating, clutching her chest as her socialite friends stared at her in pure disgusted horror. My father was shouting at Marcus, blaming him for the entire sloppy operation. Marcus was screaming at Ashley, calling her a spoiled idiot for putting their entire escape plan in writing. The brilliant, arrogant facade they had maintained for 29 years had completely, instantly shattered into a million tiny, unrecoverable pieces. They were no longer the perfect, wealthy suburban family. They were a pack of cornered, desperate criminals, turning on each other the second the trap snapped shut. Veronica reached over and calmly muted the audio feed. She looked at me and smiled, her eyes gleaming with dark, corporate satisfaction. "They have exactly 12 hours, Clara," she said, closing her laptop with a decisive snap. "The panic has officially set in. Now we just sit back and watch them tear each other completely apart, trying to save themselves." The ticking clock had officially started, and I knew their desperate retaliation was going to be an absolutely beautiful disaster to witness. The heavy adrenaline from Veronica's office was still humming through my veins when I finally unlocked the door to my apartment. I walked inside and locked the deadbolt, dropping my cheap tote bag onto the small kitchen counter. I sat down on my faded living room sofa, watching the late afternoon sunlight creep slowly across the worn carpet. For the first time in my entire life, my apartment did not feel like a pathetic little box that my family could endlessly mock and belittle. It felt like an impenetrable fortress. Veronica had assured me that her private process server executed the delivery perfectly. The incredibly heavy legal dossier had landed right in the middle of my mother's pristine country club luncheon, exposing their massive coordinated fraud to every single wealthy socialite in her inner circle. The brilliant, meticulously crafted facade they had spent decades building was currently burning to the absolute ground. I knew it was only a matter of time before the initial shock wore off and the sheer desperate panic set in. I did not have to wait long. Exactly 45 minutes after the legal packet was dropped onto their table, the heavy brass buzzer of my apartment building intercom echoed sharply through my living room. The sound was incredibly loud and deeply aggressive. Someone was not just pressing the button, they were repeatedly smashing their fist against it. I stood up, my heart giving a familiar, anxious flutter out of pure, deeply ingrained habit. But I pushed the fear down deep, letting the freezing cold reality of their massive betrayal harden my spine into solid steel. I walked slowly over to the small, grainy security monitor mounted on the wall, right next to my front door. The black and white video feed showed the front entrance of my building. Standing on the concrete steps, violently pounding on the reinforced glass doors, were my father Richard and my mother Patricia. They looked absolutely unrecognizable. The polished, arrogant country club royalty from just an hour ago had completely vanished. My father had taken off his expensive suit jacket, and his silk tie was pulled loose, hanging haphazardly around his neck. His face was a dark, mottled red, and he was shouting something completely unintelligible directly at the security camera. My mother stood right behind him, still wearing her expensive pastel dress, but her hair was disheveled, and her posture was completely bent with frantic terror. She kept nervously looking over her shoulder, as if she expected federal agents to tackle them right there on the suburban sidewalk. I pressed the small plastic talk button on the intercom console, keeping my finger firmly held down so they could hear my voice clearly through the outdoor speaker. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice projecting a perfectly flat and unbothered tone. My father's had immediately snapped up toward the camera lens. "Clara," he roared, his voice distorted and harsh through the cheap microphone. "Open this door right now. Get down here and open this door so we can talk about this ridiculous stunt you are pulling. You are going to call off your attack dog lawyer, and we are going to fix this as a family." I stood safe and secure behind 3 stories of brick and reinforced steel, staring at his furious face on the monitor. "I am not opening the door, Dad," I replied smoothly. "We have absolutely nothing to discuss in person. You received the legal packet. You read the terms. You have exactly until 8 o'clock tonight to return the $450,000 to my trust account, or Veronica hands the entire file over to the federal authorities." "You cannot do this to me," my father screamed, completely ignoring my conditions and reverting to his favorite tactic of sheer physical intimidation. He violently kicked the heavy metal frame of the security door, causing the camera feed to actively shake. "I am your father. You will come down here and listen to me right now. You think you are so incredibly smart, hiding behind some expensive downtown lawyer. I will completely destroy your credit, Clara. I will make that phone call and default on your loans the second I get back to my car. You will be completely homeless by the end of the month. I let out a soft, genuinely amused laugh that echoed loudly through the outdoor speaker. The unexpected sound of my laughter seemed to completely short-circuit his brain. Go ahead and make the call, Dad, I said, leaning closer to the microphone. Default on the loans. Veronica already flagged the entire $75,000 line of credit as highly fraudulent. The banking authorities are already investigating the original electronic signatures you forged when I was 20 years old. If you default on that loan today, you are just adding another massive piece of concrete evidence to your own federal indictment for identity theft. You have absolutely no leverage left. Your threats do not work anymore. My father took a stumbling step back from the door, his mouth opening and closing in pure shock. He finally realized that the terrified, obedient daughter he had bullied for 29 years was completely gone. The realization hit him so hard, his broad shoulders physically slumped in defeat. When his aggressive rage failed to break me, my mother immediately shoved her way in front of the camera lens. This was their classic, synchronized routine. When the roaring patriarch could not force my compliance, the weeping mother would instantly tag in to deploy the heavy emotional guilt. Patricia pressed her manicured hands against the glass, her face twisted into a mask of pure manufactured agony. Clara, please, she begged, her voice trembling with loud dramatic sobs. Please, baby, you have to stop this. You are completely destroying our family. We were just trying to help Marcus. He is your brother-in-law, Clara. He was in terrible financial trouble, and he just needed a temporary bridge loan to save his business. We never meant to permanently take the house from you. We were going to pay you back eventually. How can you be so incredibly cruel to your own sister? Ashley is completely devastated. Her entire vow renewal is ruined, and she cannot stop crying. You are trying to ruin her happiness out of pure spite and jealousy. I stared at the grainy image of my weeping mother and felt absolutely nothing but pure, intense disgust. She was still trying to gaslight me. Even with the undeniable proof of their federal crimes staring her right in the face, she was instinctively trying to twist the narrative to make me the villain. Do not ever try to talk to me about family loyalty, Mom, I replied, my voice dropping to a freezing razor-sharp whisper. Family loyalty is not forging your own daughter's signature to steal her inheritance. Family loyalty is not helping a scam artist launder money through offshore accounts so your favorite child can drink champagne on a private island. You explicitly called my job pathetic. You sat in a private dining room last night and happily watched Dad threaten to destroy my career and make me homeless. You do not care about family loyalty. You only care about getting caught. My mother let out a loud wailing sob, completely burying her face in her hands as her ultimate gaslighting attempt spectacularly failed. She turned away from the camera entirely defeated and crying uncontrollably. That was when my father, Richard, finally broke. The man who had spent his entire life dominating everyone around him, the man who viewed empathy as a pathetic weakness, completely collapsed. He shoved my mother aside and grabbed the handle of the security door, his face completely devoid of any remaining arrogance. He looked up at the camera and massive tears began to stream down his red cheeks. Clara, please, he sobbed, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that I had never heard before in my entire life. Please do not do this to me. I am a respected man in this community. I am a business owner. If you send those files to the authorities, I will lose everything. The state will throw me in federal prison. I am too old to go to prison, Clara. Please, I am begging you. Do not destroy your own blood. Do not send your own father to jail over a stupid house. I watched him cry on the small black and white screen. I watched the great suburban patriarch reduce himself to a blubbering, terrified mess, begging for mercy from the exact daughter he had relentlessly tortured and financially abused for nearly 3 decades. A tiny, deeply buried fraction of my childhood empathy momentarily flickered in my chest. A small, naive voice whispered that maybe I had pushed them far enough. Maybe seeing them this utterly humiliated on a public sidewalk was justice enough. But then, I vividly remembered the sickening fear I felt when I saw that sold sign staked into Aunt Evelyn's beautiful green lawn. I remembered the sheer absolute terror that gripped my lungs when he threatened to default on $75,000 of secret debt, effectively promising to make me homeless and unemployed. I remembered the cold, calculating smile on Ashley's face as she thanked me for funding their permanent escape to the Maldives. They were only sorry because Veronica had successfully cornered them. If I backed down now, they would instantly revert to their vicious, predatory nature and ruin me. I leaned heavily into the intercom microphone, taking a slow, deep breath to ensure my final words were delivered with absolute, devastating clarity. "You are not my blood," I stated coldly. "You are just a criminal who stole my name and my future. You have exactly 8 hours left to return my money." I took my finger off the button, completely cutting off the audio feed, and walked away from the monitor. I left them standing on the concrete steps, utterly locked out of my building and my life. They had tried everything in their arsenal. They had tried terrifying rage. They had tried suffocating guilt. They had tried pathetic begging, and they had absolutely failed. But as I sat back down on my faded sofa, waiting for the long hours to tick by, I noticed something incredibly important about the security footage I had just witnessed. My mother was there. My father was there. But Marcus and Ashley were nowhere to be seen. Marcus was not the kind of man who would stand on a sidewalk crying and begging for forgiveness. He was a cornered, desperate con artist, rapidly running out of time and running completely out of options. His fake luxury empire was actively collapsing around him, and he knew he could not simply wait for my father to negotiate a pathetic surrender. Marcus was going to completely bypass the family drama. He was going to go completely rogue and try to personally eliminate the threat himself. And I knew with absolute terrifying certainty that he was actively coming for me alone. The evening air was thick and heavy as I finally pushed through the glass exit doors of the medical clinic. I had spent the last 10 hours doing exactly what my family had mocked me for doing. I sat in a dreary cubicle staring at endless rows of complex billing codes and ensuring that every single medical procedure was properly documented and perfectly balanced. The harsh fluorescent lights had given me a dull headache, but I felt an incredible soaring sense of power that had absolutely nothing to do with my day job. My mind was entirely focused on the ticking clock. Veronica had deployed the legal packet at the country club luncheon, and my parents had spectacularly failed in their pathetic attempt to intimidate me at my apartment complex. I knew they were currently completely drowning in panic. I zipped up my cheap fleece jacket and walked across the sprawling concrete parking lot toward my faded 10-year-old sedan. The lot was mostly empty, illuminated only by a few flickering orange sodium lights that cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement. I was just reaching into my pocket to grab my car keys when a figure suddenly stepped out from the deep shadows, directly behind a concrete support pillar. My breath caught sharply in my throat, and my hand instinctively clenched around my keys, ready to use them as a weapon. But as the figure stumbled into the dim, orange light, I instantly recognized the man blocking my path. It was Marcus. But this was not the same Marcus who had stood in my driveway 48 hours ago, adjusting his heavy gold watch and mocking my financial literacy. This was not the slick, arrogant luxury travel curator who had confidently laughed at my absolute destruction. The man standing in front of me, in the clinic parking lot, looked like a completely hollowed-out shell. His expensive, tailored navy blue suit was heavily wrinkled and covered in fine dust. His perfect silk tie was gone, and the top 3 buttons of his crisp white dress shirt were ripped open, revealing a chest heaving with frantic, ragged breaths. His flawless grooming had completely disintegrated. He was sweating profusely despite the cool autumn air, and his eyes were wide bloodshot and darting frantically around the empty parking lot like a cornered animal desperately looking for an escape route. "Clara," he gasped, his smooth baritone voice completely replaced by a pathetic, trembling wheeze. "Clara, please stop walking. You have to listen to me for just 1 minute." I did not back away. I stood my ground next to the driver's side door of my beat-up car and looked him slowly up and down, feeling a rush of absolute profound disgust. "You have absolutely no right to be here, Marcus." I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any lingering empathy. The deadline is ticking. You should be spending this time talking to a criminal defense attorney, not stalking me in a parking lot. Please, Clara, he begged, taking a stumbling step forward and holding his hands up in a gesture of total surrender. You do not understand what is happening. The firm your lawyer hired, they froze everything. They completely locked down my domestic operating accounts and they flagged the offshore holding shell. I cannot access a single dollar. My phone has not stopped ringing. My investors are finding out. They are threatening to kill me, Clara. They are going to completely destroy me before the federal agents even get the chance to put me in handcuffs. I leaned casually against the cold metal door of my car, crossing my arms. I watched the great financial shark absolutely drown in the shallow end of the pool. That sounds like a terrifying personal problem, Marcus, I replied coldly. You built a massive Ponzi scheme. You stole millions of dollars from wealthy private investors to fund a fake internet lifestyle for my incredibly shallow sister. You ran out of money and decided to forge my signature to steal my dead aunt's house just to cover your tracks. You dug this grave with your own 2 hands. Now you get to lie in it. He aggressively ran his trembling hands over his face, wiping away the thick sweat that was pouring down his forehead. I know, he stammered the words spilling out of his mouth in a frantic, chaotic rush. I was desperate, Clara. The market shifted and I over-leveraged the real estate portfolio. I just needed a temporary cash injection to keep the entire operation afloat. Your father offered me the house. Richard came to me and said you did not need it. He said you were just a medical biller who would not even know how to manage a property. He told me to use my notary stamp to expedite the transfer. He completely manipulated me into doing it. I let out a sharp, incredibly loud laugh that echoed off the concrete pillars. Are you seriously trying to blame my father for your own felony forgery? I asked, shaking my head in pure disbelief. You are a licensed real estate broker, Marcus. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew that house legally belonged to me, and you willfully participated in a massive criminal conspiracy to steal it. Do not try to play the innocent victim now. You are just upset because Veronica completely exposed your pathetic little shell game. Marcus suddenly lunged forward, closing the distance between us until he was standing less than 3 feet away. His eyes were wide with a terrifying, manic desperation. I instinctively tensed my muscles, preparing to fight him off, but he did not try to hurt me. Instead, he frantically reached into the inside pocket of his ruined suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy brown paper envelope. He practically shoved it into my chest. His hands shaking so violently, the paper loudly rustled against my jacket. I have $50,000 right here, Clara, he whispered, his voice cracking with pure, pathetic panic. It is completely untraceable. It is the absolute last remaining block of liquid cash I have left from a dormant client fund. I physically withdrew it this morning, before your lawyer managed to freeze the secondary accounts. It is entirely yours in cash right now, with absolutely no taxes and no questions asked. I stared down at the thick brown envelope pressing against my chest, and then slowly looked back up into his desperate, bloodshot eyes. You are trying to bribe me? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, freezing whisper. It is not a bribe, he pleaded desperately, entirely ignoring reality. It is a settlement, Clara. It is a private, off-the-book settlement. Just take the cash and call your lawyer. Tell Veronica Sterling that you are officially dropping my specific name from the federal lawsuit. Tell her I had nothing to do with the forgery and that your father orchestrated the entire thing alone. You can completely destroy Richard. I do not care what happens to him or your terrible mother. You can even keep the house. Just take the $50,000 and let me walk away from this. If you do not drop my name, the federal prosecutors are going to send me to a maximum security prison for 20 years. I will completely lose everything. Ashley will leave me. My life will be totally over. Please, Clara. You know exactly what it is like to struggle for money. $50,000 in cold, hard cash will completely change your life. I stood in the dim orange light of the parking lot, listening to the man who had mercilessly mocked my modest income just 2 days ago now, literally begging me to accept his dirty, stolen money. He genuinely believed that because I worked a blue-collar job, I possessed absolutely no moral compass. He thought I was just as corrupt and shallow as the toxic family I came from. He thought he could buy his way out of federal prison by offering me the very last scraps of the money he had stolen from someone else. I slowly reached up and pushed his trembling hands away from my chest, causing the heavy brown envelope to fall directly onto the dirty concrete pavement. The thick stack of $100 bills slightly spilled out of the paper flap, resting in a greasy oil stain next to the tire of my car. "You really do not understand anything about me, Marcus," I said, my voice ringing with an absolute terrifying clarity. "You stole my legacy to fund a completely fake lifestyle. You used my dead aunt's house to buy yourself a few more weeks of pretending to be a wealthy mogul on the internet. You stood in my driveway wearing a suit paid for by my inheritance, and you explicitly told me I was just a pathetic minnow in a shark tank. You told me to go back to my sad little apartment and accept defeat." "Clara, please," he whimpered, falling to his knees on the concrete right next to the spilled envelope of stolen cash. I took a deliberate step back, looking down at him with an expression of pure, unwavering disgust. "I am a medical billing auditor, Marcus." I continued my tone, entirely unbothered by his pathetic display. "My entire professional career is dedicated to ensuring that complex financial numbers balance perfectly. When someone breaks the rules, I find it. When someone steals, I expose it. You do not get to commit federal wire fraud, forge a legal property deed, and attempt to flee the country and then expect to buy your way out of it with $50,000 of stolen client funds. You do not get a discount on justice." I pulled my car keys out of my pocket and hit the unlock button. The yellow headlights flashed brightly, illuminating his tear-stained, terrified face. I opened the driver's side door and slid into the worn fabric seat. "You are going to federal prison, Marcus," I said, staring right into his eyes. "You are going to lose your fake luxury business. You are going to lose your expensive leased cars. Ashley is absolutely going to divorce you the second the authorities freeze your final offshore account. You are going to spend the next 2 decades in a federal cell, thinking about how you completely destroyed your own life because you severely underestimated the quiet sister who works in a medical clinic." "No, Clara, wait!" he screamed, scrambling to his feet and reaching for the door handle. "You cannot do this to me. I will double it. I will find more money. Please, just give me another chance." I forcefully slammed the heavy car door shut, severing his desperate, pathetic pleas. I put the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I pressed the button to roll up the window, entirely locking out the sound of his frantic screaming. I did not look back at him as I shifted the car into drive and hit the gas pedal, leaving him standing completely alone in the dark parking lot, surrounded by a scattered pile of dirty money he could no longer use to save his own pathetic life. I drove out of the clinic parking lot and merged onto the quiet evening highway. The dashboard clock glowed brightly, indicating it was approaching 8 o'clock at night. The 12-hour deadline Veronica had clearly outlined in the legal packet was rapidly drawing to a close. My family had entirely failed to return the $450,000 to my trust account. They had completely failed to intimidate me into silence. And Marcus had spectacularly failed to bribe me with his last remaining stolen assets. They had absolutely exhausted every single dirty trick in their manipulative playbook, and they had still completely lost the war. I drove through the city streets feeling a profound, deep-seated sense of absolute peace settling over my entire body. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. At exactly 5 o'clock the next morning, the final deadline would officially expire. Veronica Sterling would electronically transmit the massive 50-page forensic dossier directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Internal Revenue Service, and the State Real Estate Fraud Division. The federal authorities would instantly execute the emergency injunctions, revoking Marcus and Ashley's passports long before they ever reached the international boarding gate. The ticking clock was practically deafening in my ears, but I was not afraid anymore. I was simply waiting for the sun to rise and for the absolute righteous destruction of my toxic family to officially begin. At exactly 5 o'clock in the morning, the digital alarm on my phone began to chime softly in the dark. I was sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa in Veronica Sterling's pristine downtown law office, watching the pale gray morning light slowly bleed through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. I had not slept a single wink. I did not feel tired. I felt completely, absolutely awake. The 12-hour deadline we had given my toxic family had officially expired. They had not returned a single dime to my trust account. They had not tried to negotiate. They had made their final fatal choice, believing they could simply ignore the threat and fly away. I picked up my phone and looked across the room at Veronica, who was already sitting at her desk with a cup of black coffee in her hand. She gave me a single sharp nod. I typed the word execute into our secure message thread and hit send. Less than 10 seconds later, Veronica pressed a button on her keyboard and electronically transmitted the massive 50-page forensic dossier directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Internal Revenue Service, and the State Real Estate Fraud Division. The federal injunctions to freeze their passports were officially live in the system. The incredibly heavy gears of justice had finally begun to turn, and absolutely nothing on earth could stop them now. 4 hours later, the morning departure rush at the international terminal was in full vibrant swing. Through the live continuous updates from Veronica's private investigator, who had successfully tracked their luxury vehicle all morning, I knew exactly when Marcus and Ashley pulled up to the departures curb. They stepped out of their expensive black car, completely radiating the kind of unearned, arrogant privilege that had defined their entire toxic existence. Ashley was wearing a pristine white linen travel suit that practically screamed old money. She was aggressively barking rude orders at the driver to carefully handle her massive stack of matching designer luggage. Marcus stepped onto the concrete curb, wearing a relaxed cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored slacks, looking every inch the highly successful international real estate broker he desperately pretended to be. They walked through the sliding glass doors of the massive, bustling airport terminal, completely oblivious to the fact that they were walking straight into a highly coordinated federal trap. They genuinely believed they had won the ultimate victory. They thought my complete silence over the past 12 hours meant I had finally folded under the crushing weight of my father's financial blackmail. They assumed I was sitting alone in my tiny apartment, absolutely terrified of losing my modest medical billing job, while they effortlessly escaped to a tropical paradise with hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen cash. The private investigator reported that they were loudly laughing and taking endless selfies as they strolled through the crowded airport. Ashley was undoubtedly already drafting her perfectly curated social media captions about their exclusive vow renewal in the Maldives, complete with hashtags about living a blessed luxury life. Marcus was likely calculating exactly how long it would take for his remaining defrauded investors to realize his Ponzi scheme had collapsed and he was permanently gone. They bypassed the massive crowded lines for economy seating and headed straight for the exclusive VIP priority first-class check-in desk. They walked with their heads held high, completely unaware that their names were currently flashing bright warning red on every single federal aviation watch list in the country. Marcus confidently approached the polished marble counter and smoothly slid their dark blue passports across the surface toward the ticketing agent. He gave the woman his signature charismatic smile, the exact same charming smile he used to scam millions of dollars from innocent, unsuspecting people. "Good morning," he said, his smooth baritone voice projecting absolute entitlement. 2 first-class tickets to mail. We have a private luxury connection waiting for our overwater bungalow, so we would highly appreciate it if you could expedite the bag check process. The agent, a seasoned professional who had undoubtedly dealt with arrogant, demanding passengers 1,000 times before, picked up the passports and opened them. She began typing their names into her secure terminal system. The moment she hit the enter key, the standard flight itinerary screen completely vanished. Instead, a high-priority federal alert instantly locked her entire computer terminal. The agent did not panic. She did not gasp. She simply stared at the bright red warning screen for a fraction of a second before smoothly training her face into a flawless mask of polite corporate apology. "I am so incredibly sorry, sir," she said, keeping her voice perfectly even and professional. "My system seems to be experiencing a minor technical glitch with your specific booking reference. It will just take me a brief moment to manually verify your boarding passes." Marcus let out an annoyed, exasperated sigh and dramatically checked his heavy gold watch. "We are flying first class," he complained loudly, his charming facade instantly slipping into aggressive irritation. "You need to call a supervisor and fix this machine immediately. We have a very tight international schedule to keep, and I absolutely do not have time for airline incompetence." The ticketing agent nodded politely and picked up her desk phone, pretending to call a manager to assist with the system error. In reality, she was quietly triggering the silent security alarm that instantly notified the airport police and the federal authorities stationed just 50 yards away that 2 highly flagged international flight risks were currently standing right at her desk. Ashley crossed her arms and impatiently tapped her expensive leather shoe against the polished terminal floor. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she whined, her high-pitched voice drawing the attention of several nearby passengers. "I'm going to write a terrible review about this airline. They clearly do not know who we are or how much we paid for these tickets." They were so utterly consumed by their own massive egos that they completely failed to notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere around them. They did not notice the 2 TSA security agents quietly positioning themselves at the very end of the check-in line, physically blocking their exit route. They did not notice the sudden, purposeful movement of suited men walking briskly toward their exact location. The heavy double doors of the private airport security office suddenly swung open. 4 uniformed airport police officers and 2 men wearing dark suits and prominent federal badges stepped out into the main terminal. They moved with absolute terrifying precision directly toward the first-class counter. Marcus was leaning heavily over the desk, aggressively demanding his boarding passes, when he finally caught the rapid movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned his head, and the arrogant scowl on his face instantly melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He recognized the federal badges immediately. He recognized the exact posture of law enforcement officers moving in to execute a targeted arrest. The slick luxury real estate broker who had proudly bragged to my face about his offshore accounts and his untraceable stolen money suddenly looked like a terrified, helpless little boy. "Marcus James and Ashley James," one of the federal agents stated loudly, his voice cutting through the bustling noise of the international terminal like a physical steel blade. "Step entirely away from the counter and keep your hands exactly where we can see them." Marcus stumbled backward away from the desk, his hands instinctively shooting up into the air. His perfectly tailored slacks suddenly seemed entirely too big for his shrinking, trembling frame. Ashley, on the other hand, had absolutely no comprehension of what was actually happening. She looked at the federal agents with genuine upper-class outrage. "Excuse me," she demanded, stepping forward and pointing an angry, manicured finger directly at the lead agent. "You cannot talk to us like that. We are VIP first-class passengers. We are flying to the Maldives for our vow renewal. My father is a very powerful, wealthy man, and he will have your jobs for harassing us in public." The lead federal agent did not even blink at her pathetic suburban threats. "Your father is currently the subject of a simultaneous federal raid at his primary residence." "Mom," the agent replied coldly, completely shattering her delusional reality in one single devastating sentence. "You are both being officially detained under suspicion of felony wire fraud, interstate flight from justice, and criminal conspiracy. Your passports have been formally revoked by a federal judge. You are not going to the Maldives. You are going to a federal holding facility." Ashley physically staggered backward, as if she had been brutally struck in the chest. Her jaw dropped wide open, and she looked wildly at Marcus, waiting for him to deploy his smooth-talking lawyer vocabulary and magically fix the situation. But Marcus was completely dead silent. He was staring blankly at the cold steel handcuffs the airport police officer was unhooking from his heavy leather duty belt. Marcus realized exactly what Veronica Sterling had done. He realized the quiet medical billing specialist he had so ruthlessly mocked and underestimated had successfully orchestrated the absolute dismantling of his entire fraudulent life. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the police officer ordered, stepping up to Marcus and firmly grabbing his arm. Marcus did not resist. The fight had completely drained out of his body. He slowly turned around, and the loud, sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting shut around his wrists echoed perfectly through the quieted terminal. When Ashley finally saw the cold steel locked securely around her husband's wrists, her arrogant high society facade finally spectacularly shattered. She began to scream. It was not a dignified, quiet cry. It was a loud, hysterical, shrieking wail that instantly stopped every single person in the international terminal dead in their tracks. Hundreds of diverse travelers turned their heads to watch the incredibly wealthy-looking blonde woman throwing a massive public tantrum. "Do not touch me!" she shrieked violently, pulling her arm away as a female officer moved in to safely detain her. "You are making a huge, horrible mistake. I did not do anything illegal. It was all Marcus. He told me the money was completely clean. He told me he fixed the house paperwork for my sister. I just wanted my luxury vacation." She was literally throwing her own husband entirely under the bus in front of hundreds of staring strangers just to save her own skin. But the federal agents did not care about her pathetic, tearful excuses. They already had her explicitly detailed written text message confession securely filed in their 50-page evidence dossier. They firmly grabbed her arms, forcefully pulling them behind her back, and locked the heavy metal handcuffs tightly around her delicate wrists. Ashley fell heavily to her knees on the polished airport floor, sobbing hysterically and screaming loudly about her ruined designer luggage and her stolen overwater bungalow. The massive crowd of travelers stood in a wide circle, silently watching the spectacular, incredibly public downfall of the golden child and her con artist husband. They were completely stripped of their stolen wealth, their fake power, and their arrogant dignity. The federal agents hauled them roughly to their feet and began marching them out of the terminal toward the waiting squad cars, completely ignoring Ashley's endless, pathetic screaming. As Marcus and Ashley were publicly paraded through the sliding glass doors in cold steel handcuffs, the true magnificent scope of Veronica's legal assault was just beginning to unfold. The airport interception was only the very first precision strike, because at that exact same moment, clear across town, the federal authorities were actively kicking down the heavy wooden front door of my parents' beautiful suburban home, entirely ready to execute the simultaneous warrants that would completely burn my father's stolen empire right down to the ground. I was still sitting in the sleek leather chair of Veronica's downtown corner office when the second incredibly destructive phase of our flawless execution officially began. We had the live security feed from the airport playing on one monitor, but Veronica's secure laptop was already pulling up the real-time updates from the federal task force moving in on my parents' sprawling suburban subdivision. I did not just want to hear about my father's arrest secondhand from a legal clerk. I needed to see it with my own two eyes. I needed to witness the exact spectacular moment the man who mercilessly stole my future realized he had completely and permanently destroyed his own. Veronica and I left her quiet office and climbed into the back of her heavily tinted black town car. We instructed the driver to take us directly to the wealthy, manicured neighborhood where my parents lived. We parked discreetly at the very end of their long, winding cul-de-sac, entirely hidden behind a row of tall, decorative evergreen trees. I stared through the dark, tinted glass at my parents' massive two-story colonial home. It was the absolute epitome of high society, suburban perfection. The immaculate green hedges were perfectly trimmed, and the sprawling front lawn looked like a magazine cover. In the wide paved driveway sat my mother's pristine imported luxury sedan gleaming brightly in the pale morning sun. Parked right next to it was the sleek black Porsche that Marcus had left there, the night before safely tucked away while he and Ashley took a private car to the international terminal. The entire neighborhood was completely silent and peaceful, but that quiet, arrogant illusion was about to be violently and permanently torn apart. 4 unmarked dark federal tactical vehicles and 2 heavily marked local police cruisers suddenly turned onto the pristine street. They did not use their loud sirens, but their flashing red and blue lights painted the surrounding luxury homes in a frantic, terrifying emergency glow. The vehicles moved with incredibly swift military precision, swarming my parents' perfectly paved driveway and completely boxing in the expensive luxury cars. More than a dozen armed federal agents, wearing heavy, dark tactical vests with bright yellow letters printed across their backs, poured out of the vehicles. They marched straight up the brick walkway toward the massive oak front doors, moving with absolute, undeniable law enforcement authority. The incredibly loud, booming sound of federal agents pounding on the heavy wood door echoed all the way down the quiet suburban street. It was not a polite neighborly knock. It was the aggressive, unmistakable sound of a targeted raid. A few seconds later, the massive door swung open, and my father, Richard, appeared. He was wearing his expensive silk morning robe, holding a ceramic coffee mug, and looking completely annoyed at the sudden disruption to his peaceful, wealthy morning routine. The look of supreme, arrogant irritation on his face lasted for exactly one fraction of a second before the lead federal agent stepped forward and slapped a printed federal arrest warrant directly against his chest. The agent did not give my father a single moment to speak or protest. He loudly and firmly announced that Richard was being placed under immediate federal arrest for felony identity theft, massive criminal conspiracy, and multiple counts of interstate wire fraud and forgery. My father physically stumbled backward, as if he had been brutally struck. The expensive ceramic coffee mug slipped from his trembling fingers and shattered violently against the brick porch, sending hot, dark coffee spraying across his bare feet. He tried to raise his voice. He desperately tried to deploy his booming patriarchal authority to intimidate the armed agents the exact same way he had always intimidated and silenced me. He demanded to call his expensive country club defense lawyers. He shouted that he was a highly respected pillar of the suburban community and that this was a massive, catastrophic misunderstanding. But federal agents absolutely do not care about suburban social status or country club memberships. Two incredibly large officers immediately grabbed my father's arms, forcefully spinning him around and slamming him firmly against the side of the brick entryway. The loud, sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists echoed perfectly through the quiet neighborhood. My father, the man who had mercilessly blackmailed me in a restaurant hallway, the man who had gladly stolen my dead aunt's house to protect his own pathetic gambling debts, was now sobbing openly, entirely stripped of his unearned dominant power. Then, my mother, Patricia, came sprinting out of the front door. She was wearing her plush designer bathrobe, her hair completely undone, and she was frantically screaming at the officers to release her husband. She rushed forward, trying to physically push a heavily armed federal agent away from my father. The agent effortlessly blocked her path, raising a stern hand and warning her that she would be instantly thrown to the ground and arrested for obstruction of justice if she took one more step. My mother froze instantly, her face contorted into a mask of absolute, pure, hysterical terror. She looked wildly around the cul-de-sac, suddenly realizing that her wealthy elite neighbors were already stepping out onto their front porches and perfectly manicured lawns. They were holding their morning coffees, openly staring and whispering as they watched the spectacular, incredibly public downfall of the great local patriarch. Patricia began screaming that the agents had absolutely no legal right to be on her property. She yelled that she was going to personally sue the federal government and completely ruin their careers for this humiliation. The lead financial investigator calmly stepped forward and handed her a thick, heavy stack of legal documents. He explicitly and coldly informed her that as of 5 o'clock this morning, every single domestic and international bank account tied to her, my father, Marcus, and Ashley had been entirely and permanently frozen. He stated clearly that she could not access a single penny of her supposed wealth. She could not use her platinum credit cards. She could not access her offshore retirement funds. She could not touch the secret safety deposit boxes, and she could not even hire a basic defense attorney. Their entire stolen financial empire had been completely seized under strict federal anti-money laundering statutes. But the absolute ultimate devastation, the final crushing blow to her massive narcissistic ego, came a few minutes later when two massive heavy-duty diesel tow trucks slowly rumbled down the quiet suburban street, their bright yellow caution lights flashing intensely. My mother completely stopped breathing as the heavy trucks backed up directly into her pristine driveway. The federal agents calmly informed her that every single luxury vehicle purchased or maintained with fraudulent commingled funds was being instantly impounded as active state evidence of purchased goods from laundered money. My mother let out a horrific shrieking wail that pierced the morning air as the tow truck operators coldly hooked heavy, thick steel chains to the front axle of Marcus' sleek black Porsche. She watched in absolute catatonic horror as the expensive sports car was violently dragged up onto the metal flatbed, its security alarm blaring uselessly into the neighborhood. Then, the operators expertly backed up the second heavy truck and attached the massive steel chains directly to my mother's beloved imported luxury sedan. The exact car she used to drive to her exclusive country club luncheons, the car she used to project her massive, unearned superiority over everyone else, including me, was being ruthlessly stripped away from her, right in front of her entire neighborhood audience. She fell heavily to her knees on the perfectly manicured green grass, sobbing uncontrollably and begging the unbothered agents to leave her car alone. She was absolutely shattered, completely broken, and left with absolutely nothing but the expensive bathrobe she was wearing and the horrifying realization that her entire life was a massive, coordinated lie. I sat quietly in the dark-tinted back seat of Veronica's town car, watching the entire chaotic scene unfold with a cold, detached sense of absolute righteous justice. I watched my father being forcefully shoved into the back of a heavily marked police cruiser, his head pushed down by a federal agent, his arrogant dominance completely and permanently erased. I watched my mother weeping pathetically on the wet grass, surrounded by armed officers and the shattered remains of her morning coffee, while her wealthy friends and neighbors stood on their porches judging her absolute ruin. For 29 years, they had constantly gaslit me. They had relentlessly mocked my modest medical billing job, entirely belittled my existence, and happily sacrificed my financial future to fund their completely fake luxury lifestyle. Now, the universe had violently balanced the scales. They had stolen my $450,000 legacy to protect a pathetic con artist, and in return, I had systematically orchestrated the total, utter destruction of their entire existence. The federal cruisers slowly pulled away from the massive house, carrying my father off to a cold, maximum security holding cell where his country club charm would be absolutely useless. The loud rumbling tow trucks drove down the street, carrying away the very last visible symbols of their fake, unearned wealth. My mother was left completely, entirely alone, standing in the empty driveway of a massive house she could no longer legally afford, with frozen bank accounts she could no longer access. They were completely left with absolutely nothing, just as they had intended to leave me. And as Veronica tapped her polished manicured fingernails against her digital tablet, looking over at me with a sharp, triumphant, brilliant smile, I knew it was finally time to execute my absolute last and final move. 2 months. That is exactly how long it took for the massive, unrelenting gears of the federal and civil justice systems to completely grind my parents' fake luxury empire into absolute dust. The speed of their total destruction was nothing short of breathtaking. I sat in the polished wooden chairs of the county courthouse, wearing a sharp-tailored suit that I had bought with my own, honestly earned money, sitting perfectly upright next to Veronica. Across the wide center aisle sat the people who used to be my family. They looked entirely unrecognizable. My father, Richard, seemed to have aged 20 years in just 60 days. His custom suits had been confiscated, and he was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray jacket. His skin was pale and sagging, and his usual booming, arrogant presence had been completely, entirely erased. My mother, Patricia, sat beside him, staring blankly at the floor. Her designer clothes were gone. Her expensive hair highlights had faded, exposing thick gray roots. She clutched a crumpled tissue in her trembling hands, looking like a hollowed-out shell of the cruel suburban queen she used to be. We were gathered in the courtroom for the final civil judgment regarding the theft of Aunt Evelyn's house and the massive fraudulent loans. The federal criminal cases were already actively processing, but Veronica had aggressively pushed the civil litigation forward to ensure they could never hide a single remaining penny. The judge, a stern older woman with absolutely no patience for white-collar criminals, did not hesitate for a single second. She looked directly at my parents with pure, undisguised disgust as she read the final ruling aloud to the silent courtroom. The court officially awarded me the complete original market value of my stolen house, exactly $450,000. But Veronica had been absolutely merciless in her pursuit of justice. She successfully argued for massive punitive damages, citing the severe emotional distress, the calculated identity theft, and the horrific breach of familial trust. The judge completely agreed. She slammed her heavy wooden gavel down and ordered an additional $300,000 in punitive damages to be paid directly to me. My father actually let out a loud, pathetic whimpering sound in the middle of the quiet courtroom. He stood up on shaky legs, begging the judge and claiming he was completely bankrupt. He cried that the federal government had already seized all his liquid cash and his business accounts. He told the judge he had absolutely no way to pay a civil judgment of that astronomical magnitude. Veronica simply stood up, smoothed her suit jacket, and addressed the court with a brilliant, terrifying smile. She calmly informed the judge that my parents possessed two massive, fully funded retirement accounts. They had spent decades hoarding hundreds of thousands of dollars in secure offshore index funds, intending to live out their golden years in absolute comfortable luxury while leaving me to drown in their forged debt. The judge did not even blink. She immediately signed the aggressive court order, legally authorizing the complete and total liquidation of both Richard and Patricia's retirement portfolios. Every single dollar they had saved for their future was instantly wiped out and forcefully transferred directly into my secure trust account. I watched my mother bury her face in her hands and sob hysterically, realizing she was now staring down the rest of her life with absolutely zero financial safety net. But the absolute sweetest and most perfectly poetic piece of justice came directly from my father's own blinding arrogance. During the forensic financial investigation, Veronica's team uncovered exactly how my father had secured that massive $75,000 secret line of credit in my name. To bypass the strict banking regulations and cover up his massive underground gambling debts, he had explicitly used his own immaculate suburban colonial home as the primary collateral. He had literally bet his own house on a fraudulent loan in my name, completely assuming I would just quietly pay it off out of pure, terrified obedience. When Veronica formally exposed the forgery to the federal banking authorities, they instantly voided the fraudulent loan in my name. But because my father had actively committed felony bank fraud, using his own property as leverage, the bank immediately called in the entire massive debt. Because all of his other assets had been seized or liquidated, he could not make a single payment. The bank swiftly and ruthlessly initiated a total foreclosure on the pristine suburban house he loved more than his own daughter. As for my golden sister, Ashley, her perfect curated reality had shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Marcus had desperately tried to fight the federal wire fraud charges, but the evidence we provided was too incredibly overwhelming. He took a miserable plea deal to avoid a massive trial and was instantly sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. The second the heavy steel doors locked behind him, Ashley filed for a highly publicized divorce, desperately trying to distance herself from his criminal record to save her own social image. But her image was already completely destroyed. Her wealthy socialite friends entirely abandoned her the moment her bank accounts were frozen. The beautiful, massive leased house she shared with Marcus was immediately repossessed. Her expensive designer wardrobe and her luxury jewelry were all seized and auctioned off by the federal government to pay back Marcus' furious, defrauded investors. Ashley, the girl who had mercilessly mocked my blue-collar job and bragged about her exclusive Maldives vow renewal, was now completely and utterly broke. She had absolutely no marketable job skills and no education. With her parents completely bankrupt and facing their own massive legal nightmare, they could not offer her a single dime of support. I heard through the quiet suburban gossip mill that Ashley was now working a miserable minimum wage retail job at a dying suburban mall, folding cheap sweaters for angry customers. She had been forced to move into a tiny, cramped, unrenovated studio apartment right next to a massive, noisy interstate highway. She had absolutely nothing left but a cheap, prepaid cell phone and the horrific, crushing realization that her entire golden life had been a massive, hollow lie. On a quiet, cool Sunday afternoon, I decided to take a drive. I did not invite Veronica or anyone else. I needed to do this completely alone. I drove my modest 10-year-old sedan out of the city and navigated the familiar winding roads toward my parents' incredibly wealthy suburban subdivision. The autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of orange and red, falling softly onto the perfectly paved streets. I turned my steering wheel and slowly pulled into the wide, pristine cul-de-sac where I had spent my entire childhood feeling completely invisible and unloved. I parked my car across the street and rolled down my window, staring at the massive 2-story colonial home. The immaculate green hedges were overgrown and messy. The beautiful flower beds my mother used to obsess over were full of dying brown weeds. The wide paved driveway where they used to park their gleaming luxury vehicles was completely empty. And standing right in the middle of the front lawn, hammered deeply into the expensive grass, was a massive bright yellow sign that read, "Bank-owned foreclosure," in bold black letters. I sat there in the quiet afternoon air, simply looking at the empty house. For 29 years, that house had been a terrifying fortress of emotional abuse and relentless psychological manipulation. It was the place where they had called me a pathetic failure, where they had mocked my dyslexia, and where they had explicitly told me I was entirely worthless. They had thrown me out, they had stolen my legacy, and they had happily planned to leave me drowning in massive federal debt while they escaped to an island paradise. They had expected me to quietly accept my destruction because they believed family loyalty meant I had to endure their cruelty forever. I stared at the bright yellow foreclosure sign and searched my heart for even a single tiny shred of guilt. I searched for any lingering sadness or any feeling of familial obligation toward the people who had given me life. I found absolutely nothing. There was no pain left. There was no anger left. There was only a profound, beautifully clear sense of absolute peace. I had completely leveled their fake empire, and I had taken back every single thing they had stolen from me. I was a highly successful woman with a massively funded trust account, a secure future, and a life that belonged entirely to me. I slowly rolled up my car window, completely shutting out the cold autumn air. I shifted my car into drive and pulled away from the curb. I drove out of the suburban cul-de-sac without looking in the rearview mirror a single time. I was finally incredibly and permanently free. If you are listening to this right now and you recognize your own life in my story, I want you to understand something incredibly important. You do not owe toxic people your loyalty simply because you happen to share their DNA. You do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep your abusers warm. Setting strict, aggressive boundaries is not revenge, and walking away from people who actively destroy your mental health is the most beautiful form of self-respect. You deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate your existence, not people who constantly belittle your achievements. You have the absolute right to build a life that brings you peace, and you have the right to completely walk away from anyone who tries to take that peace away from you. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single comment because I know how incredibly vital it is to finally be seen and heard. Until next time, please take care of yourself because you absolutely deserve it. Exactly 1 year has passed since the heavy wooden gavel fell in that county courtroom and completely rewrote the trajectory of my entire life. Today, I woke up in a beautiful, sprawling 4-bedroom craftsman house, nestled in a quiet, leafy neighborhood that is entirely my own. I walked down the hardwood stairs of my home, holding a warm cup of coffee, and stepped out onto my wrap-around front porch to watch the sunrise. The morning air was crisp and clean, and the neighborhood was perfectly still. There is no massive yellow foreclosure sign on my lawn. There are no federal agents knocking on my front door. There is only peace. The massive financial judgment the court awarded me was not just a restoration of my stolen inheritance. It was the absolute, undeniable foundation of my complete independence. I took the $450,000 from my stolen house and the $300,000 in punitive damages seized directly from my parents, liquidated retirement accounts, and I built an empire of my own. I did not return to the dreary cubicle at the medical clinic. I formally submitted my resignation, packed up my desk, and walked out with my head held high. I took my years of specialized experience, and I opened my own independent medical billing and forensic auditing firm. My family had spent my entire life mercilessly mocking my profession. They called me a pathetic clerk and a glorified secretary. They looked down on my blue-collar diligence while they paraded around in stolen designer clothes, funded by a massive criminal enterprise. Today, my firm employs 15 brilliant, dedicated women. We specialize in investigating complex billing fraud and uncovering hidden financial discrepancies for massive healthcare networks across the state. I am the absolute sole owner and the chief executive officer. I built a thriving, highly respected business using the exact same meticulous skills that ultimately put my fraudulent brother-in-law in a federal penitentiary and completely dismantled my father's fake luxury empire. I sit in my own beautiful corner office, now looking at the balance sheets of my own company, and I often think about the profound arrogance of toxic families. I want to talk directly to you for a moment because if you are listening to this, you might be standing in the exact same dark shadow I stood in for 29 years. Toxic families absolutely rely on a very specific dynamic to maintain their power. They construct a fragile house of cards built on lies, manipulation, and extreme favoritism. But to keep that house standing, they desperately need a foundation. They need someone to carry the heavy, crushing weight of their dysfunction. They need the quiet child, the obedient child, the scapegoat. For my entire life, I accepted that role without question. I swallowed their cruel insults. I accepted their bare minimum affection. I quietly moved my cheap car so my sister's luxury vehicles could take the prime spot in the driveway. I let them treat me like an invisible piece of furniture because I genuinely believed that my compliance was the only way to earn their love. They looked at my quiet obedience and they saw absolute pathetic submission. They mistook my silence for weakness and my blue-collar job for incompetence. They thought I would roll over because I always had. They honestly believed they could steal my dead aunt's house, force me into massive fraudulent debt, and leave me completely ruined while they flew off to a tropical island, and I would simply stay quiet and take the fall. They thought I was too weak to fight back. But boundaries aren't a betrayal, they are survival. The moment I stopped playing their game, their entire house of cards collapsed. The moment I refused to be their sacrificial lamb, the entire fraudulent reality they had constructed completely shattered. They built their comfortable, wealthy lives on the absolute guarantee of my silence. When I finally found my voice, their empire burned to the ground. It is an incredibly difficult thing to look at the people who gave you life, the people who are supposed to protect you, and realize they are actually your greatest predators. For 29 years, I believed that if I was just agreeable enough, they would eventually love me. I thought if I never asked for anything, if I never caused any drama, if I just stayed perfectly small and convenient, they would finally look at me the way they looked at my sister. I was wrong. I was so incredibly painfully wrong. Love isn't something you have to buy, and family isn't a title that excuses abuse. Real family does not forge your signature to steal your future. Real family does not explicitly tell you that you are a failure while using your spotless credit to fund their massive underground gambling debts. Real family does not sit around a country club table laughing and drinking champagne while actively plotting to leave you completely homeless. I spent decades trying to earn a seat at a table where the game was entirely rigged against me from the very beginning. I let them convince me that I was the problem. I let them convince me that my basic human desire for respect was somehow selfish and dramatic. But the truth is, they never wanted a daughter or a sister. They wanted a resource. They wanted a convenient victim they could exploit whenever their own terrible choices caught up with them. Letting go of the hope that your family will ever change is a unique kind of grief. It is a very deep, quiet mourning process. When I sat in my car and looked at the bright yellow foreclosure sign hammered into the lawn of my parents' massive suburban house, I did not feel victorious. I felt a profound echoing emptiness because I realized I was officially completely alone in the world. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, that emptiness slowly filled with something entirely new. It filled with oxygen. It filled with freedom. I realized that being alone is infinitely better than being surrounded by people who constantly make you feel worthless. I realized that the heavy crushing anxiety I had carried in my chest every single day of my life was not actually mine. It belonged to them. And the moment I completely severed all contact, I finally learned how to breathe. If you are watching this and you see your own reflection in my story, I want you to listen to me very carefully. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your family, if you've ever had to legally defend your own worth against the people who were supposed to protect you, you are not alone. You know exactly what it feels like to be the dumping ground for everyone else's insecurities. You know the exhausting, soul-crushing reality of constantly performing for a love that is always held just out of your reach. You have been told that you are too sensitive, too dramatic, or too difficult, simply because you finally stood up and demanded to be treated like a human being. They will always try to make you feel like the villain when you finally stop allowing them to treat you like a victim. But you are not the villain. You are simply a person who finally woke up and chose to survive. You do not owe anyone your absolute destruction just to keep their comfortable illusions alive. You do not need to set yourself on fire to keep your abusers warm. You deserve to be chosen, not used. It is okay to walk away. It is incredibly painful, and it will turn your entire world upside down. But it is okay to walk away from toxic blood. It is okay to demand justice. You have the absolute right to legally, aggressively protect yourself, your assets, and your future from the people who try to steal them. You are allowed to build a beautiful, completely independent life that your abusers are never granted access to. The guilt they try to force on you is just another weapon in their arsenal of manipulation. Drop that guilt right now. Put down the heavy, terrible burden of trying to fix a family that absolutely does not want to be fixed. Turn all of that incredible, relentless energy toward building your own future. Build your own home. Build your own career. Build your own chosen family out of people who actually celebrate your existence instead of just tolerating it. The quiet daughter, the invisible sister, the scapegoat, they all have an incredible reservoir of hidden strength. The resilience you built just surviving your family is the exact same strength that will allow you to conquer the entire world once you are free. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below, letting me know the exact time and place you are watching from. I read every single comment because I know exactly how important it is to finally feel seen and understood by someone who has walked through the exact same darkness. Stay strong and always choose yourself first.